Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. I still get this weird feeling in my gut whenever I think about what happened that day, back in '78. I was 13 then, living with my family in a small rural community in Cambria County, Pennsylvania. Our house sat at the edge of these dense woods that seemed to stretch on forever, the kind of place where every kid spent their summers exploring. Our neighbor, Mr. Mitchell, had this German shepherd named Rex. Big, powerful dog, smart too. I'd walk him a few times a week when Mr. Mitchell's arthritis was acting up. Rex knew those woods as well as I did, probably better with that nose of his. It was early October, I remember, because the leaves had just started changing, painting the forest in these incredible reds and golds. The air had that crisp fall smell to it. I'd taken Rex out for our usual afternoon walk through the trails behind our houses. It was about 4 in the afternoon, still plenty of daylight left. Rex was his normal self at first, running ahead, doubling back to check on me, sniffing everything. We'd done this route 100 times before. The trail eventually opened up into this clearing that bordered Old Man Weber's farm property. Weber never used that section much. It was mostly overgrown, with this ancient wooden fence marking the boundary. Years ago, people had used the far corner as an unofficial dump site for broken appliances and other junk. We were maybe 50 yards from the clearing when Rex's behavior suddenly changed. It happened so fast it caught me off guard. 1 second he was trotting ahead like normal. The next, he was frozen stiff. His ears perked forward. I figured maybe he'd spotted a deer or something. "What is it, boy?" I whispered, moving up beside him. That's when I noticed how tense his body had become. His hackles were raised, but he wasn't growling, which struck me as odd. Rex would always give a warning growl if he sensed something threatening. Instead, he started making this low whining sound I'd never heard from him before. When I tried to continue forward, Rex moved in front of me, actually pushing against my legs. It wasn't aggressive, but it was deliberate, like he was trying to herd me back the way we'd come. I remember feeling confused because this just wasn't like him at all. I gently pushed past him, curious about what had him so spooked. As we got closer to the edge of the clearing, Rex pressed himself against my leg, still making that strange whining sound. His body was trembling, not shaking like he was cold, but vibrating with tension. I could feel it against my thigh. The clearing opened up before us, with Weber's field stretching out about 100 yards to the tree line on the other side. That's when I saw it. At the far edge of the field, near that old fence and garbage pile, something was crouched down. At first, I thought maybe it was Weber or one of his farmhands, but something wasn't right about the shape. It was hunched over, digging through the pile of junk beyond the fence. The first thing that struck me was the hair, dark and matted, covering its entire body. Not fur like you'd see on a bear, but hair, longer and shaggier, either really dark brown or black. It was hard to tell in the shadows. The sun was starting to get lower, casting everything in this amber light that made details difficult to make out at that distance. What I could see clearly, though, was that whatever this thing was, it was using its hand, not a paw, to sort through the garbage. The movements were deliberate, almost methodical. It would pick something up, examine it, then discard it. The hand looked, well, like a hand, not quite human, but definitely not animal either. Larger, with what looked like opposable thumbs. It was using its fingers to manipulate objects with a dexterity no bear could manage. Despite being crouched down, its shoulders were even with the top of the fence posts, which I knew were about 4 feet high. The sheer size of the thing hit me then. If it stood upright, it would tower over me, well over 6 feet tall, maybe 7 or even 8. Rex remained frozen beside me, his body pressed so hard against my leg I thought I might lose my balance. But he didn't make a sound. No barking, no growling, just that continuous, anxious whine. His eyes never left the creature. I stood there for what felt like forever, but was probably only 30 seconds or so, just watching. The creature seemed completely focused on whatever it was looking for in that trash pile. It never turned our way or gave any indication it knew we were there. My heart was pounding so hard, I could hear it in my ears. My mouth went completely dry. I remember having this overwhelming sense that I was seeing something I wasn't supposed to see. Something that didn't belong in these woods, at least not in any world I understood. Every instinct told me to run, but some deeper part of my brain warned against sudden movements. I slowly reached down and gripped Rex's collar, then began backing away as quietly as possible. Rex didn't need any encouragement. He moved with me, step for step, never turning his back on the clearing. Once we were back among the denser trees, I changed course. Instead of returning the way we'd come, I took the long way around, following a seldom-used path that eventually connected with the road. It added at least 40 minutes to our walk, but there was no way I was going back through that clearing. Rex stayed unusually close to me the entire way home, constantly checking over his shoulder. I've never seen a dog so vigilant, before or since. When we finally got back to the neighborhood, he seemed to relax slightly, but he was still on edge. I remember Mr. Mitchell commenting on how Rex seemed spooked when I returned him. I mumbled something about a deer, too shaken to even attempt to explain what I'd actually seen. Who would believe me anyway? That night I barely slept. I kept replaying the scene in my mind, trying to rationalize it. Could it have been a bear? No. Bears don't have hands like that. Their movements are different. A person in some kind of costume. Who would be out there alone, dressed up like that, digging through old junk? It made no sense. The next day, I found myself drawn back to that spot, but I wouldn't go alone, and I wouldn't take Rex again either. I convinced my older brother to come with me, making up some story about thinking I saw someone dumping more trash there. We approached from a different angle, staying on the road. When we reached the fence line, I pointed out the garbage pile. There was nothing unusual there, no creature, no evidence that anything had been disturbing the area. My brother looked at me like I was crazy when I kept scanning the tree line, and eventually we left. I never told him what I'd really been looking for. For weeks afterward, I avoided those woods, especially that clearing. When I finally did start walking there again, I always took a different route. I never saw the creature again, but I always felt watched whenever I was in those woods after that day. Years passed, and I mostly pushed the memory aside. I never really talked about it. How could I? I had no proof, and the whole thing sounded absurd even to my own ears. I convinced myself that maybe my teenage imagination had exaggerated what I'd seen. Then, in my 20s, I came across an article about Bigfoot sightings in Pennsylvania. There was a sketch included, a large, hair-covered creature with a distinctly non-human but also non-bear appearance. Something about that image sent a chill down my spine. The proportions, the posture, it matched what I'd seen that day in the clearing. I started researching, reading accounts from other people who claimed to have seen similar creatures. So many details aligned with my experience. The careful, deliberate movements, the apparent intelligence, the way it used its hands. Even the reaction of dogs was consistent. Many reports mentioned dogs becoming fearful and quiet rather than aggressive, exactly how Rex had behaved. What stands out to me most about that day, looking back, wasn't just seeing the creature itself. It was the profound sense that I had glimpsed something that existed outside our ordinary understanding of the world. This wasn't just an unknown animal. It felt like something that straddled the line between human and beast. I've never had another encounter like that one. I moved away from Cambria County years ago, but I still think about that day whenever I find myself in dense woods. I still get that prickly feeling on the back of my neck, that sense of being watched. Rex passed away years ago, but sometimes I wonder what he knew that I didn't. What did he sense about that creature that made him react with such unusual restraint? Not fear exactly, but a kind of wary respect. I don't know what I saw that day. Bigfoot, Sasquatch. The name doesn't really matter. What matters is that for a brief moment, my understanding of what exists in our world was fundamentally challenged. Something was there in those Pennsylvania woods, something that shouldn't exist according to what we're taught, but it was as real as the ground beneath my feet. Sometimes I wish I had a better ending to this story, some kind of resolution or explanation, but real life rarely wraps things up neatly. All I know is what I saw, and even 45 years later, I can close my eyes and see that dark, hair-covered figure with its two human hands, sorting through discarded human remnants at the edge of a world that wasn't quite mine anymore. Story 2. I've been debating whether to post this for years. Even typing it out now, my hands are shaking a bit. What happened that night in November of 2001 changed me forever, and I still struggle to make sense of it. We'd been living on that property outside Morton, Washington, for about 3 years by then. It wasn't much, just a modest house on the edge of a dense forest patch with about an acre of clearing. My wife had always wanted to live somewhere quiet, away from the city, and I enjoyed having space for the kids to run around. The forest practically swallowed our property on 3 sides, with tall pines and firs standing like sentinels around our little clearing. That particular night, I remember it was a Wednesday because I'd been watching a show that only came on Wednesdays. It was miserable outside. The rain had been coming down steadily since around 4 in the afternoon, that typical November Pacific Northwest downpour that seems like it'll never stop, the kind that makes everything feel damp, even inside the house. My wife had gone to bed around 10 with our kids. I'd stayed up in the living room, half watching some late-night TV show with the volume turned low. The wood stove was putting out good heat in the corner, making the living room the warmest spot in the house. I remember feeling drowsy, that comfortable kind of sleepiness where you know you should just go to bed, but the chair feels too good to leave. It must have been sometime after midnight when I first heard it. At first, I wasn't even sure what had caught my attention, just some noise outside that didn't quite fit with the steady drumming of rain on our roof. Then it came again. A distinct sound of something heavy moving through our wet yard, like deliberate footsteps, but with a weight to them that didn't make sense. Deer don't move like that, and bears weren't common right around our property. I sat up straighter, suddenly wide awake. There was a pause, and then I heard something that still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. A long, dragging breath, not like an animal sniffing, but almost like someone trying to catch their breath after running, except deeper and rougher. It was loud enough that I could hear it clearly over the rain, which meant whatever was making that sound had to be close to the house. My first thought was to check on my family, but they were asleep in the bedrooms down the hall. Making noise might draw attention, so instead I quietly got up and switched off the lamp beside me. The TV was already playing with the volume nearly muted. The living room went dark except for the faint glow from the wood stove and the dim light filtering in from our yard light outside. We had this security light mounted on a pole that cast a weak yellow circle into part of the yard. It wasn't great, but it was enough to see if a raccoon was getting into the trash or if deer were wandering through. I moved to the window, staying to the side so I wouldn't be silhouetted against it, and peered out into the darkness. At first, all I could see was rain coming down in the yellow glow of the yard light. Then I noticed movement at the edge of the light's reach, near where our yard met the tree line. Something large was pacing back and forth, just barely visible in the dim light. I squinted, trying to make out what I was seeing. A bear, maybe. But it didn't move like a bear. As I watched, it stepped closer to the house, moving into the circle of light, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. What I was looking at wasn't a bear or any animal I recognized. This thing was enormous, taller than any man I've ever seen. It must have been over 7 feet tall, maybe closer to 8, with a massive, broad chest and disproportionately long arms. Its entire body was covered in thick, dark hair that was matted from the rain. Each step it took was deliberate and heavy. I could actually see the wet ground give slightly under its weight. Its movements were smooth, though not lumbering or awkward, but controlled. Powerful. The way it moved reminded me more of a person than an animal, but no person could look like that. The creature's head was large, with what looked like a sloped forehead that blended into a heavy brow. And its eyes, even from where I stood, I could see them catching the yard light, reflecting a dull amber color that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. Those eyes looked intelligent, alert, scanning our yard with purpose. I was frozen in place, afraid to move or even breathe too loudly. I expected it to turn and disappear back into the woods at any moment, but instead, it turned toward our storage shed, which sat about 30 feet from the main house. We used it for tools, lawn equipment, and seasonal storage. Nothing particularly valuable or interesting to an animal. The creature walked toward the shed with those same long, smooth strides. It moved with a confidence that terrified me, like it knew exactly where it was and what it was doing. When it reached the side of the shed, it raised one massive arm. I could clearly see its hand now, not a paw, but something with long, thick fingers that spread wide. It pressed those fingers against the wooden boards of the shed wall and then slowly, deliberately dragged them downward. The sound was awful, a harsh scraping noise that carried through the rain. I could see the entire shed structure shake slightly with the force of it. It wasn't just scratching, it was clawing and ripping into the damp wood with incredible strength. Splinters and chunks of wood actually fell away as its fingers gouged deep furrows in the wall. Then it stopped suddenly and turned its head toward the house, toward my window. I don't know if it could see me standing there in the darkness, but it felt like those eyes were looking right at me. Its expression was, I don't know how to describe it exactly, tense, threatening. Its broad jaw and hard-set mouth conveyed more menace than any animal snarl could. In that moment, I felt a terror unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. Not just fear for my safety, but a bone-deep, primal dread that made my heart feel like it would burst. It let out a sound then. Not quite a roar, but a low, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate through the air. It wasn't particularly loud, but somehow it carried across the yard and seemed to penetrate right through the walls of the house. I could feel it as much as hear it, a sound that seemed to resonate in my chest. Then it turned back to the shed and scraped its fingers down the wall again, leaving fresh gouges in the wood. The message was unmistakable. This thing was powerful enough to tear through our structures with ease, and it wanted us to know it. After what felt like forever, but was probably only a minute or two, the creature stopped its destruction and began pacing along the edge of our yard. It moved back and forth a few times, still watching the house, before finally turning and walking back toward the trees. Its stride never quickened. It didn't run or rush away. It simply left when it decided to leave, disappearing into the darkness beyond our yard light's reach. I stood at that window for at least another hour, afraid to move, afraid it might come back. The rain continued to fall, washing away any tracks it might have left. Eventually, exhaustion overcame my fear, and I collapsed into the chair, too terrified to go to the bedroom and too wired to sleep. I must have dozed off at some point, because I woke up still in the chair when sunlight started filtering through the windows. The first thing I did was check on my wife and kids. They were all still asleep, completely unaware of what had happened during the night. I didn't wake them. Instead, I pulled on my boots and a raincoat and went outside to look at the shed. The morning was grey and still drizzling, but there was enough light to see the damage clearly. Cut deep into the damp wood of the shed wall were 5 parallel gouges, spaced wider than any human hand could reach. The wood was splintered and raw where the creature had torn into it. I pressed my hand against the marks, trying to gauge the size of whatever had made them. My fingers barely spanned half the width between the outer gouges. I searched the yard for tracks, but the ground was a soggy mess from all the rain. If there had been distinct footprints, they'd been washed away or reduced to vague depressions that could have been anything. When my wife woke up, I showed her the damage to the shed. She was concerned, of course, but jumped to rational explanations. Maybe a bear had been scratching itself, or perhaps some local kids had vandalized our property. I didn't tell her what I'd seen. How could I? It sounded insane even to me, and I was the one who saw it. We repaired the shed the following weekend, but I never felt the same about our property after that. I installed more security lights around the house and started keeping a loaded shotgun in our bedroom. For months afterward, I'd jolt awake at every sound in the night, expecting to hear that slow scrape of claws on wood or that deep rumbling growl. We ended up moving away from that property about 2 years later. I told my wife it was to be closer to better schools for the kids, which was partly true, but mostly I just couldn't stand living on the edge of those woods anymore, knowing what might be watching us from the trees. It's been more than 20 years now, and I've never seen anything like that creature again. But I still dream about it sometimes, those amber eyes reflecting in the yard light, those impossible fingers tearing through solid wood like it was paper. Even now, living in a completely different state, I never feel quite comfortable near dense forests, especially at night. I don't know what I saw that night outside Morton, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, some undiscovered species. I don't have a name for it, but I know it was real. I know it was intelligent, and I know it wanted us to be afraid. Sometimes I wonder if it was a warning, telling us to leave its territory. Other times I think it was simply letting us know who really belonged in those woods. Either way, the message was received. Nothing in my life has ever shaken me like that night, and nothing ever will. Story 3. I still haven't told many people about this. Even typing it out now makes my hands feel shaky. This happened about 1.5 years ago when I was 16, and I'm still trying to make sense of it. It was mid-July, one of those brutally hot Florida summer days, the kind where the air feels like soup and you're drenched in sweat just standing still. My brother, little sister, and I decided to take the ATVs out to the trails behind our property. We'd been riding those trails since we were kids, knew them like the back of our hands. At least I thought we did. We'd spent most of the morning just cruising around, racing each other through the pine flatwoods, jumping over small hills and splashing through muddy patches left from the rain earlier that week. It was around 2 p.m. when it happened. The sun was directly overhead, beating down through the gaps in the pine trees. I was in front, leading our little convoy down this narrow trail that cuts through a dense section of pines with thick palmetto undergrowth. The trail bent sharply to the left before straightening out again. As I came around that bend, something caught my eye about 100 yards ahead. My first thought was that someone else was out there on an ATV. That wasn't unusual. These trails were popular with locals. I slowed down a bit, not wanting to ride up too fast on a stranger, but as the distance closed between us, I realized something wasn't right. Whatever was standing there wasn't on an ATV, it was just standing, on 2 legs. At first, I thought maybe it was a hunter, but it was way too big. And we were on private land that connected to our family friend's property. Nobody should have been hunting there. I slowed down more, and my brother pulled up beside me. He saw it too. I could tell by the way his whole body tensed up. My sister was behind us, and I remember feeling this immediate protective instinct. wanting to tell her to turn around and head back to the house. But I couldn't find my voice. We kept approaching more slowly now, and I got a better look. This thing was massive, not just tall, though it had to be at least 7 feet, but thick, built like a linebacker, but bigger. Its shoulders were impossibly broad, and its chest looked solid as a barrel. It was standing at an angle, its body facing toward the woods on our right. But its head was turned in our direction. The whole body was covered in this dark hair, brownish black, like wet soil. Not fur exactly, more like human hair, but thicker, and it grew in these uneven patches or clumps. It wasn't smooth or even like an animal's coat. It looked matted in some places, especially around the shoulders. We were maybe 60 yards away when I cut my engine. My brother and sister did the same. The sudden silence was deafening. For about 30 seconds, we just stared at this thing, and it seemed to be watching us too. I remember thinking how calm it looked, not scared, not aggressive, just observing. Its face is what really got me. It wasn't an animal face, it was more human-like, but not quite human either. The same dark color as its hair, with deep-set eyes under a prominent brow ridge. I couldn't make out the details clearly from that distance, but I could tell it had a flat, wide nose and a powerful jaw. My little sister whispered something behind me. I don't even remember what she said, but it seemed to break the spell. The creature turned, not in a rushed way, but deliberately, and began to move toward the tree line. It didn't run exactly, more like a casual jog, with this weird hunched posture. Its arms hung down at its sides, longer than they should be, swinging slightly as it moved. The way it disappeared into the woods was uncanny. One moment it was there, this massive figure against the pine trees, and the next it had melted into the shadows between them. No crashing sounds, no branches breaking, just gone, like it knew exactly how to move through that dense undergrowth without making a disturbance. We sat on our ATVs for what felt like forever, but was probably only a minute or two. Nobody said anything. Finally, my brother muttered, "What the hell was that?" His voice sounded strange, higher than normal. I didn't answer. Instead, I slowly rolled my ATV forward to the spot where the creature had been standing. My brother followed, telling our sister to stay back a bit. The ground there was mostly sandy, typical for those pine flatwoods, and there, pressed clearly into the sand, were footprints. Not animal tracks, not human tracks either, at least not normal ones. These were massive, easily 17 or 18 inches long. I know because I put my own foot next to one to compare, and my boot, size 11, looked tiny beside it. The prints were deep too, like whatever made them was incredibly heavy. There were 4 clear prints leading toward the trees, with a stride of about 4 feet between them. The sand was too loose to show toe details, but the general shape was unmistakable, a large, flat foot with what looked like 5 toes at the front. The last print was half-formed where it entered the line of palmettos. My brother got off his ATV and crouched down next to the prints. He didn't say anything, just stared at them. I remember him reaching out like he was going to touch one, then pulling his hand back. I took out my phone to take a picture, but my hands were shaking so badly that the first few came out blurry. I finally managed to steady myself enough to get a couple of clear shots. Then we heard it, a sound from deep in the woods where the thing had disappeared. Not a howl or a scream, like you hear about in stories. It was more like wood knocking against wood, 2 sharp cracks followed by a third after a pause. Deliberate, signaling. My sister started crying. Not loudly, just these quiet little sobs that somehow made everything worse. I told her it was okay, that we were leaving right now, but my voice sounded strange even to me. As we turned the ATVs around, I couldn't shake the feeling we were being watched. The woods suddenly seemed different, threatening in a way they'd never been before. These were the same trails I'd grown up riding, the same pines and palmettos I'd played around since I was a kid. But now they felt alien and dangerous. We rode back faster than was safe, barely slowing for turns or bumps. No one spoke. When we got to the house, we parked the ATVs and went inside. It took almost an hour before any of us mentioned what we'd seen. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying those 30 seconds in my mind. The way it stood, so still, but so obviously alive and aware. The casual way it had turned and walked away, not frightened by us at all. Those footprints in the sand. The next day, we went back with my dad. I was nervous about returning, but somehow more afraid not to. Not to confirm what we'd seen. The footprints were still there, though less defined after a night of light rain. My dad just stared at them, then at the woods, then back at the prints. He's not a man who gets rattled easily, but I could tell he was unsettled. We never saw it again, though we stopped riding in that particular section of the trails. Sometimes at night, especially when the windows are open and the sounds of the woods drift in, I think I hear that knocking sound again. 3 distinct knocks, waiting for an answer. I've looked online. I've read accounts from other people who claim to have seen similar things. Some call it Bigfoot or Sasquatch. Some have more local names for it. I don't know what to call what we saw that day, but I know it was real. The image of it standing there is burned into my memory. This massive figure with its dark, clumped hair and that too human face, watching us as calmly as we were watching it. My brother and I have a tacit agreement not to talk about it much. My sister sometimes still has nightmares. When I asked her once what she dreams about, she just said that we didn't leave when we did, that we followed it into the trees. I think about those footprints a lot. 17 inches long. A 4-foot stride, the casual strength it would take to move through dense undergrowth without making a sound. Whatever we saw that day, it belongs in those woods in a way we never will. And sometimes, when I'm lying awake at night, I wonder if it's still there, moving silently between the pines, watching and waiting. Oh, story 4. I still can't explain what happened that night outside Westport. It's been 13 years, and I'm still looking for answers. This is probably going to sound crazy to most people, but I need to share it somewhere. Maybe someone else has experienced something similar. Back on July 2nd, 2010, 2 of my buddies and I decided to check out these woods near Westport, Ontario, after hearing about a Sasquatch sighting in the area. I know, Bigfoot. Sounds ridiculous, right? I was skeptical too, but curious enough to want to check it out firsthand. We arrived around midnight. It was one of those perfect summer nights, clear sky, almost full moon, warm enough that we didn't need jackets. We turned off the main road onto this rough dirt track that cut into the forest. The headlights barely penetrated the wall of trees on either side. It felt like driving into another world. We parked about half a mile in, grabbed our backpacks with water, snacks and flashlights, and started hiking. The forest was dense, mostly pine, and some deciduous trees that I couldn't identify in the darkness. The smell was intense, that rich, earthy scent of decomposing leaves mixed with pine. We only went about 100 feet from the road before deciding that was far enough. There was a small clearing there, and we could see glimpses of the lake through the trees. The quiet was absolute. No traffic noise, no distant voices, just the occasional rustle of leaves in the slight breeze, and some water lapping at the shoreline. I remember checking my watch. It was 12:23, and thinking how isolated we were. Cell service was practically non-existent out there. We'd done some research on Bigfoot investigation techniques. I feel ridiculous even typing that now, and decided to try tree knocking. The idea is that Sasquatch supposedly communicate by hitting trees with sticks or rocks. So we found a solid branch and took turns knocking it against this massive pine tree. We agreed to space our knocks about a minute apart to listen for any responses. I did the first knock. The sound echoed through the trees, surprisingly loud in the stillness. Then we waited, barely breathing, straining to hear anything. At 58 seconds, I was counting in my head, there was a response, A single, clear knock from across the lake to the west. Just one knock, exactly like ours. I felt the hair on my neck stand up. We looked at each other, eyes wide. My friend whispered, "Did you guys hear that?" We both nodded. It could have been an echo, I thought, or someone camping on the other side of the lake playing a joke. After another minute, my other friend did the second knock. We waited. Sure enough, another single knock response came from the same direction across the lake. This one was unmistakable. It couldn't have been an echo after that much time. My hands were sweating now. I did the third knock, harder this time. The response came faster, still from across the lake. But then, something else happened that I still can't explain. There was another knock, but from a completely different direction, somewhere deeper in the forest to our east. It wasn't an echo. It was a separate, distinct knock. My stomach dropped. If these were responses, it meant there were at least two of whatever was out there communicating, responding to us, or maybe even triangulating our position. One of my friends, let's call him Jay, suddenly grabbed my arm. "Dude!" he whispered, pointing across the dirt road we'd just come down. "Something's moving over there." I strained to hear. At first, nothing. Then I caught it. Subtle sounds of movement through underbrush. The soft crackling of dry branches. What sounded like careful footsteps, but heavier than a deer or small animal. "Do you hear that?" Jay asked, his voice barely audible. That sound, like a low growl. I didn't hear the growl at first, but then it reached my ears, a deep, rumbling sound that didn't belong to any animal I recognized. It was brief, just a few seconds, then gone. We stood frozen, listening. The forest seemed to have gone completely silent now, like everything was holding its breath. Even the insects had stopped chirping. My other friend was frantically digging in his backpack. "I should have brought a camera," he muttered, "or at least a voice recorder." I was starting to regret the whole expedition. What had seemed like an interesting adventure a few hours earlier now felt dangerous and deeply unsettling. We were essentially unarmed, unless you count a couple of pocket knives and flashlights, and we were surrounded by dense forest in the middle of the night. Then, about 10 minutes after the last tree knock, we heard it. From somewhere to the south, at what seemed like considerable distance, came a howl. It lasted maybe 5 seconds, a long, steady sound that started low and rose slightly in pitch before trailing off. It was deeper and more resonant than any wolf or dog I've ever heard. It had a quality to it that I can't quite describe, almost human-like in its expressiveness, but definitely not human. Before we could even process that, a second howl answered from roughly the same direction but further away. This one was higher pitched but had the same unsettling quality. Then a third howl, more distant still. "Holy shit," whispered Jay. His face had gone pale in the moonlight. "That's not coyotes or wolves." I nodded, unable to speak. The sounds had triggered something primitive in my brain, a deep instinctual fear response. I knew without any logical explanation that whatever made those sounds wasn't something I wanted to encounter. We stood there for maybe half an hour total, experiencing all this. The knocks had stopped after that third exchange, but we could still hear occasional movement in the forest around us. Subtle sounds that might have been normal forest noises, or might have been something large moving stealthily between the trees. I kept scanning the tree line with my flashlight, half expecting to see eyes reflecting back, or some massive shape moving between trunks. But there was nothing visible, just shadows and trees and the occasional swaying branch. "I think we should leave," I finally said. The others quickly agreed. We started walking back to the car, moving faster than we'd admit to each other. I kept looking over my shoulder, unable to shake the feeling that something was watching us. The sounds of our own footsteps on the dirt road seemed impossibly loud. Just as we reached the car, one final knock echoed through the forest, much closer than the others had been. It sounded like it came from just inside the tree line, maybe 50 feet away. We practically jumped into the car. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them into the ignition. As we pulled away, headlights sweeping across the trees, I swear I saw movement just at the edge of the light's reach, something large stepping back deeper into the shadow of the forest. The drive back to town was silent. None of us knew what to say. What do you say when you've experienced something that shouldn't exist according to everything you've been taught? In the 13 years since, I've gone over that night countless times in my mind. Could the knocks have been other people playing a prank? Maybe. But how would they have known we'd be there, in that specific spot, at that specific time? And those howls. I've played recordings of every known North American predator, and nothing matches what we heard that night. I wish we'd stayed longer. I wish we'd brought recording equipment. I wish we had some kind of proof beyond our own memories, because without evidence it's just another weird story that's easy to dismiss. But I know what I heard. Something was in those woods that night, something intelligent enough to respond to our knocks, something large enough to make those heavy footfalls, something with a voice that could produce those unearthly howls. I haven't gone back to those woods. Part of me wants to set up cameras, bring better equipment, maybe get some answers. But another part of me is afraid of what I might find, or what might find me. All I know for sure is that something unusual was happening in those woods outside Westport. And 13 years later, I still have no explanation for what it was. That is Story 5. I've never shared this publicly before. It's been over 4 years now, but what happened that day in November still haunts me. I'm not the type to believe in monsters or make up stories for attention. I'm just an average guy who likes hiking with my dog. But what we encountered that day in the woods of Cowlitz County has changed me forever. It was Tuesday, November 12th, 2019. I remember the exact date because I had taken the day off work after a long weekend shift. The weather was typical Washington state, overcast, misty, with that damp chill that seeps into your bones. I decided to take my dog Bruno for a walk along one of our regular trails near the Toodle River corridor. Bruno's a big boy, about 70 pounds of muscle and loyalty. A lab mix with a gentle temperament who's never been afraid of anything. We hit the trail around 4 in the afternoon. Looking back, I should have known better than to start so late in November, but I figured we had about an hour of decent light left. The forest was quiet that day, eerily so. The mist was rolling through the trees, creating this ghostly atmosphere that in hindsight feels like foreshadowing. About 15 minutes in, Bruno started acting weird. Usually he pulls ahead, eager to explore every scent, but suddenly he tensed up. His ears went straight up and he stopped dead in his tracks. I tugged gently on his leash. "What's up, buddy?" I asked, thinking maybe he'd spotted a deer or raccoon. But this was different. His body went rigid and he let out this low, rumbling growl, not his normal "I see a squirrel" reaction. He was staring intensely into the tree line to our right, and I felt the hair on my arms stand up. That's when I heard it. Branches snapping somewhere in the distance. Not the light crack of a small animal moving through underbrush, but heavy, deliberate breaks. Then came a sound I'll never forget, a slow, deep exhalation that seemed to hang in the misty air. It wasn't an animal sound I recognized, and I've encountered plenty of wildlife on these trails. Common sense should have sent us back the way we came, but curiosity got the better of me. I convinced myself it was probably just an elk, or maybe a black bear, nothing we hadn't encountered before from a safe distance. So we pressed on, though Bruno stayed unusually close to my side. The trail narrowed as we continued, hemmed in by dense cedar and fir trees on both sides. The mist had thickened, limiting visibility to maybe 50 feet ahead. My watch read 4:50 in the afternoon when everything changed. There was movement ahead, maybe 30 or 40 feet down the trail. At first, it looked like a shadow shifting, but then I still struggled to describe what I saw. A massive figure, and I mean massive, stepped partially out from behind a huge cedar tree. It remained half hidden, but what I could see was enough to stop my heart for a second. The thing was tall, way taller than me, and I'm 6'1". It was covered in dark hair or fur with broad shoulders that seemed impossibly wide. The mist and the fading light made details hard to make out, but there was no mistaking that this was an upright figure standing on two legs. Bruno exploded into action before I could process what I was seeing. He lunged forward, barking and snarling like I'd never heard before. His 70 pounds strained against the leash, nearly pulling me off balance. The creature's reaction is burned into my memory. It stomped forward with one heavy foot and swung one massive arm downward, striking a fallen tree with such force that bark and rotting wood exploded outward. The sound it made, Jesus, I still hear it in my nightmares, was this deep, guttural roar that seemed to vibrate the ground beneath my feet. Bruno, fearless idiot that he is, tried to charge forward again, pulling so hard on the leash that it cut into my palm. In response, the creature did something that seemed almost intelligent. It crouched lower, leaned forward, and began swaying side to side in what I can only describe as an intimidation display, like it was saying, "You really don't want to do this." Then it roared again, louder this time, and violently snapped a nearby sapling, tearing it partially from the ground with seemingly no effort. It took 3 deliberate steps toward us, each footfall heavy enough that I swear I felt vibrations. That's when I witnessed something I'd never seen before. Bruno, my brave, sometimes foolhardy companion who once tried to chase off a mother bear, completely changed his demeanor. His tail tucked between his legs, he backed up behind me and let out the most pitiful whimper I've ever heard him make. This dog who protected me from an aggressive stranger once was now looking to me for protection. My body finally caught up with my brain, and I started backing away slowly, keeping my eyes on the creature, but trying not to make direct eye contact. Bruno was pressed against the backs of my legs, still whimpering. I gripped his leash tight, terrified he might bolt and provoke the thing further. As we retreated, the creature followed, not charging, not rushing, but maintaining a deliberate pace that matched our backward steps. Each time Bruno gathered enough courage to bark again, the thing would stomp one foot or slap the ground with an open hand, silencing him immediately. I was so focused on watching the creature that I wasn't paying enough attention to the trail. My heel caught on an exposed root, and I stumbled slightly. That tiny sign of weakness was all it took. The creature charged forward 2 quick strides, covering ground with shocking speed, then stopped less than 15 feet away. That's when the smell hit me. People talk about fear having a smell, but this was something else entirely. A powerful, foul odor like rotting vegetation mixed with wet animal musk and something else I can't even describe. It was so strong it made my eyes water. The creature crouched low, one hand pressed into the soft ground of the trail and let out a sound that started as a growl and rose to a guttural howl. I could feel the sound in my chest. Then it rose back to its full height, easily 7 feet tall, maybe more, and slammed both hands against its chest with enough force that I heard the impact over Bruno's whimpering. Just when I thought it was going to charge us fully, it stepped back toward the tree line, partially disappearing into the mist and shadows, but it didn't leave. As we continued our retreat, moving as quickly as I dared without turning my back, I could tell it was shadowing us, moving parallel to the trail about 20 yards into the trees. For what felt like forever, though it was probably closer to 10 minutes, it followed us. I know this because we covered about 200 yards of trail before reaching the fork that would lead back to the gravel service road. The entire time, it announced its presence by breaking branches and occasionally striking tree trunks with enough force to echo through the forest. At one point, something flew through the air from the direction of the creature and struck the trail about 10 feet ahead of us, a rock about the size of a baseball, not thrown directly at us, but close enough to be a warning or a demonstration. Bruno never stopped trembling. My 70-pound protector was reduced to a frightened puppy, pressing so close to my legs that I nearly tripped over him several times. I wasn't doing much better. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel each pulse in my throat, and my legs felt like they might give out at any moment. The standoff finally ended when we reached the gravel service road. The tree line was further back from the road, and the creature didn't follow us into the more open area. The last I saw of it was a dark shape moving deeper into the forest, branches swaying in its wake. I half jogged, half stumbled the quarter-mile back to my truck, Bruno keeping pace beside me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. The drive home is a blur in my memory. The aftermath was almost as disturbing as the encounter itself. Bruno, who normally bounces back from everything, remained deeply affected. For 3 days, he refused to go outside except for quick, nervous bathroom breaks in our fenced backyard. He slept pressed against me, something he never did before. He would startle at the smallest sounds and stare out the windows with that same rigid posture I saw on the trail. I didn't report the incident officially. Who would I tell? What would I say? I saw Bigfoot. I'd sound crazy. I did some research in the weeks that followed and found reports of similar encounters in that same general area, going back decades. Some details matched so closely with what I experienced that it sent chills through me. I've been back to those woods since then, never alone and never on that specific trail. I carry bear spray now, though I'm not convinced it would do anything against what we encountered. Bruno will hike other trails with me, but if I even drive toward that area of the county, he starts showing signs of anxiety in the car. I don't know what we encountered that day. I'm not going to put a label on it or make claims about cryptids or folklore. All I know is what I saw, what I heard, what I smelled. It was real, it was intelligent, and it could have hurt us if it wanted to. Sometimes I wake up at night thinking I hear that deep rumbling breath outside my window. On particularly misty days, I catch myself scanning the tree line of my property, looking for movement where there shouldn't be any. Whatever it was, it let us leave. I can't shake the feeling that was a choice it made, not luck on our part. Story 6. I still get shivers thinking about that fall in '96. My wife Margaret and I had been living on our homestead near Northport, Washington for about 3 years by then. We loved that place. 7 miles from the nearest paved road, nestled against beautiful forest with a creek running along the eastern edge. It was everything we'd dreamed of when we left Seattle behind. We had a modest setup, our cabin, a small barn where we kept some goats, a chicken coop, and a large garden. Our dog Rex, a German Shepherd mix, had plenty of space to run. It was peaceful, private, until late September when everything changed. It started so subtly, I almost convinced myself it was nothing. Just as dusk was settling in, I was splitting firewood when I heard it. A rhythmic knocking from the trees beyond our property line. 3 loud strikes, then a pause, then 3 more. It was deliberate, almost like a signal. I remember stopping mid-swing, listening hard. When it happened again, I called Margaret out to listen. Woodpeckers, she suggested. But we both knew better. The sound was too forceful, too calculated, like someone taking a baseball bat to a tree trunk. That night, it continued for about 20 minutes before stopping. We tried to brush it off, but something about it left me uneasy. The next evening, same thing, 3 knocks, pause, 3 more, always starting right after sunset. By the end of the first week, we'd gotten used to it enough that Margaret joked about our punctual forest neighbor. But deep down, I was growing more concerned. Whatever was making those sounds was consistent, intelligent, and it seemed to be testing our reactions. The second week is when the screams started. I was taking out trash after dinner when I heard it. A high-pitched wailing that made every hair on my body stand up. It wasn't a cougar or coyote or anything I recognized, and I'd spent plenty of time in these woods. This sound was almost human, but not quite, higher and more powerful than any person could make. When I told Margaret, She suggested maybe it was a fox or some bird we weren't familiar with, but her eyes told me she didn't believe that any more than I did. Rex's behavior started changing around this time too. He'd bark at the tree line for no apparent reason, hackles raised, but wouldn't go near the edge of the yard. Other times, he'd whimper and hide under the porch, refusing to come out even for food. This was a dog who'd faced down black bears without flinching. By the third week of this, the knocking had become a nightly occurrence, sometimes lasting for hours. The screams were less frequent but more disturbing, longer, more varied in pitch, and then I saw it for the first time. I was checking on the goats before bed, flashlight in hand, when movement caught my eye near the back of the barn. Something massive and dark shifted in the shadows, taller than a man. When I swung my light toward it, it was gone, but the goats were in a panic, bleating and pressing themselves against the far side of their enclosure. That night, I told Margaret what I'd seen. "Maybe it's just a bear," she said, but we both knew bears don't knock rhythmically on trees or scream like that. "I'm keeping my rifle closer," I told her, and she didn't object. Things escalated quickly after that. On October 12th, I remember the date clearly because it was Margaret's birthday. We were having a quiet dinner when the knocking started, louder than ever before. It wasn't just one location anymore. It sounded like multiple trees being struck simultaneously from different directions around our property. Then came the screams. Not just one voice, but several, calling and answering each other. Margaret grabbed my arm so tight her nails drew blood. "Alan," she whispered, "they're surrounding us." I grabbed my rifle and went to the window. The moon was nearly full, casting silver light across our yard, but I couldn't see anything moving in the trees. The sounds continued for almost 2 hours before stopping abruptly. Neither of us slept that night. The next morning, I walked the perimeter of our property. I found several broken branches, not snapped by wind, but broken downward as if something had pulled on them. These were thick branches, 8 feet off the ground or higher. And near the creek, I found something that made my stomach drop, a clear footprint pressed into the mud. It was huge, maybe 16 inches long, with 5 distinct toe impressions. Nothing around here makes tracks like that. Nothing known, anyway. I didn't tell Margaret about the footprint. I told myself I was protecting her, but honestly, I was trying to protect myself from having to acknowledge what it might mean. For the next 2 weeks, the activity became more brazen. The knocking would sometimes happen in broad daylight. The screams grew more frequent. Twice, we heard heavy bipedal footsteps on our porch at night. But when I grabbed my rifle and checked, nothing was there, just Rex cowering under a chair, trembling. Our goats stopped producing milk. They'd huddled together day and night, nervous and jumpy. We lost 2 chickens, not to predation. They just died, apparently from fear. Margaret started talking about leaving just for a while, staying with her sister in Spokane. I was too stubborn. This was our home. I wasn't going to be scared away. Then came October 29th. I was splitting the last of the firewood for the evening, working later than usual to finish the pile. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, with that deep blue twilight settling in. Margaret was inside preparing dinner. I heard Rex start barking frantically from the porch, then abruptly stop with a whimper. That's when I felt it, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. I turned slowly toward the tree line and saw it. Standing between 2 pines at the edge of our clearing was the largest creature I've ever seen. It was at least 8 feet tall, with impossibly wide shoulders and long arms that hung down to its knees. Its entire body was covered in dark hair. Not fur, but hair, longer in some places than others, and it was just standing there, watching me. I couldn't move. My axe hung limply at my side as we stared at each other. Its face was hard to make out in the fading light, but I could see its eyes reflecting a dull amber glow. I don't know how long we stood like that, probably only seconds, but it felt like hours. Then it shifted slightly, and I realized with horror that it wasn't alone. About 20 yards to its right, partially hidden behind a large cedar, was a second figure. This one was smaller, maybe 7 feet tall, but with the same basic shape and proportions. I finally broke from my trance and backed slowly toward the house, never turning my back to them. Once I reached the porch, I rushed inside, locked the door, and grabbed my rifle. "They're out there," I told Margaret, who took one look at my face and knew something was terribly wrong. 2 of them. Big. I don't know what they are." She peered cautiously through the window. "I don't see anything, Alan." But within minutes, the knocking started. Violent, angry pounding that seemed to come from all sides of our property. 3 strikes. Pause. 3 more. Over and over, faster and more insistent than ever before. Then the screams began. God, those screams. They weren't just calling to each other now. They were screaming at us, at our house. The sound was deafening, primal, filled with an emotion I couldn't identify. For nearly an hour, they circled our cabin. We could hear heavy footsteps crunching through the fallen leaves, branches snapping under enormous weight. Twice, something slammed against our walls with enough force to rattle dishes off shelves. Margaret was crying silently, holding Rex, who was shaking uncontrollably. I stood by the window with my rifle, but I couldn't bring myself to fire it. Some primal instinct told me that would only make things worse. The worst moment came when something tapped on our bedroom window. Not the wild pounding from before, but 3 deliberate, almost gentle taps. Our bedroom was on the 2nd floor. Just after midnight, it stopped. The silence was almost as terrifying as the chaos had been. We stayed awake all night, huddled together on the sofa, jumping at every creak of the house settling. At first light, I ventured outside. What I found still haunts me. Large, bare footprints, 18 inches at least, circled our entire house. One of the porch support beams was cracked. A window screen had been torn off, and caught on a nail near the back door was a long strand of coarse, dark hair, unlike anything I'd ever seen. The activity continued off and on for months afterward, though never again with the intensity of that night. We tried reporting it to local authorities, but they dismissed it as bears or vandals. One Forest Service guy seemed to take us more seriously, but officially he couldn't do anything. We hung on for almost a year, but the constant sense of being watched wore us down. Every night, I'd see shadows moving just beyond the reach of our yard lights. Margaret developed insomnia so severe she had to go on medication. Rex never returned to his former self, always nervous, always alert. In the end, we sold the place in '97. Lost money on it, but we didn't care. Some things are more important than property values. I've spent years researching what happened to us, reading about similar encounters. Some people use names like Sasquatch or Bigfoot, but those terms seem almost trivial compared to what we experienced. These weren't the shy, elusive creatures from Patterson-Gimlin footage. They were assertive, territorial, intelligent. We live in suburban Spokane now. I still spend time outdoors, still hunt and fish, but never alone and never after dark. Some nights I wake up sweating, convinced I can hear 3 knocks. Pause. 3 more knocks on our bedroom wall. Margaret doesn't like me talking about it. She says we should just move on. But I can't, because I know what's out there in those remote forests. And sometimes in my darkest thoughts, I wonder if they remember us too. Story 7. I've never actually written this all down before. My hands are shaking just thinking about it, but maybe putting it out there will help me make sense of what happened. Even now, 52 years later, I can still feel the cold sweat break out when my mind wanders back to that night in autumn of '71. We were living pretty rough back then. My husband and I had built this tiny cabin on Sugarloaf Mountain in Boulder County, and when I say tiny, I mean tiny. Just 12 by 16 feet for a family of 5. Me, my husband, and our 3 kids. We were part of that whole back to nature movement happening at the time, wanted to get away from the rat race, teach our kids self-sufficiency, all that idealistic stuff from those days. The cabin was simple but sturdy. We'd built it ourselves over the summer, using mostly salvaged lumber and whatever materials we could afford. The kids thought it was an adventure, like camping but with walls. The oldest was 10, our daughter was 8, and our youngest boy was 5.5. He was always the sensitive one, always seeing shapes in shadows and getting spooked by normal forest sounds. At least that's what I told myself before that night. It was mid-October. The aspens had already turned golden, and the nights were getting seriously cold. We had the wood stove going most evenings. The cabin had this weird layout because of how we built it on the slope. The backside was partially dug into the hillside, while the front had a small porch about 4 feet off the ground. We'd put in these small windows wherever we could to save on glass, but still get light and air circulation. The kids slept in bunks we'd built into one wall. The oldest had the bottom bunk, and our youngest had the top one. We'd put in this tiny window right by his bunk so he could look at the stars at night. It was maybe 10 by 12 inches, nothing fancy. That particular night, I remember it had been clear but moonlit, the kind of mountain night where everything looks silvery blue and the shadows seem extra dark. We'd gone to bed early like we usually did. No electricity meant we basically followed the sun. Must have been around 9 or 9:30 when everyone was asleep. I don't know exactly what time it was when it happened. All I know is that I was yanked from a deep sleep by the most blood-curdling scream I've ever heard. It wasn't just a kid's nightmare cry. This was pure terror, the kind of scream that makes your heart stop before you're even fully awake. It was our youngest. By the time I sat up, he was already scrambling down from his bunk, falling more than climbing, just desperately trying to get away from that window. He was hysterical, couldn't even form words at first, just these gasping sobs. My husband had jumped up and grabbed the flashlight we kept by the bed, and our other 2 kids were sitting up looking scared and confused. Our boy threw himself into my arms, shaking so hard I could barely hold on to him. His skin was ice cold despite the cabin being warm from the stove. When I finally got him to look at me, his eyes were wide as saucers, pupils so dilated I could barely see any color. "There's a monster," he finally choked out. "At my window. It was looking at me." My husband immediately went to the window with the flashlight, but our son screamed again, "Don't go there, it'll get you." I tried to calm him down, telling him it was just a dream, or maybe an owl or raccoon on the roof, but he was adamant in that way kids are when they're absolutely certain of something. No, it had a face, like a person, but not, and big eyes that were shining. He buried his face against me again, his little body still trembling violently. My husband checked all the windows and the door, but didn't see anything outside in the immediate area. He wanted to go out and look around, but I begged him not to. Something about our son's reaction had me genuinely scared. I've seen kids with nightmares before, but this was different. This was raw fear, unlike anything I'd ever seen in him. None of us slept the rest of that night. We kept the kerosene lamp lit, and the kids all huddled with us in our bed. Our youngest refused to even look in the direction of his bunk. As he calmed down bit by bit, he started describing what had happened. He said he'd woken up to weird footsteps outside, not like deer or any animal he was used to hearing. These were heavy, deliberate steps. Then there was this sound he tried to imitate, a sort of hooting whistle that didn't sound like any bird or animal we knew in those mountains. Curious, he turned to look out his little window, and that's when he found himself staring directly into a face. The way he described it makes my skin crawl even now. He said it was huge, with a flat nose and a heavy brow. The face was dark, covered in hair, but not like a bear, more like a person with hair all over. And the eyes, he kept coming back to the eyes. He said they caught the moonlight and seemed to glow, but they were looking at him, not just in his direction. They were intelligent eyes that knew he was there. Given where that window was positioned, whatever looked through it would have had to be at least 7 or 8 feet tall. Maybe more, since the window was up on the slope side of the cabin. When morning finally came, my husband went outside to look around. I made him take the rifle, even though he laughed it off. I wasn't laughing. There was something about our boy's terror that had gotten under my skin in a way I can't explain. He didn't find much, no clear footprints, because the ground was pretty hard and rocky around the cabin. No fur caught on the rough windowsill, no obvious signs that anything had been there. But he did notice some of the branches on a small pine near that side of the cabin were broken about 7 feet up, like something large had pushed through them. We tried to rationalize it over the coming days. Maybe it was a bear standing up. Maybe it was a combination of moonlight, shadows, and a half-asleep child's imagination. But our son wouldn't budge on what he'd seen, not 1 inch, and he flatly refused to sleep in that bunk again. We ended up rearranging the entire cabin, moved the bunks to the opposite wall, covered that window with a piece of plywood. Our son slept with a flashlight for months afterward. He'd wake up in the night, switch it on, and scan the cabin like he was expecting that face to somehow be inside with us. For weeks after, I found myself jumping at every sound outside the cabin at night. The normal forest sounds I'd grown used to suddenly seemed menacing. I'd catch myself staring out the windows into the darkness, half expecting to see a pair of eyes staring back. We talked to a few locals about it, trying to be casual. Most of them chuckled and told us bear stories. But there was this one old-timer at the general store who got real quiet when we mentioned where our cabin was and what our son had described. He didn't say much, just that there had been stories about Sugarloaf Mountain for years. When we pressed him, he shrugged and said some places in the mountains were better left alone after dark. We stayed in that cabin for another year before moving back to town. Never saw anything like what our son described again, but there were nights when we'd hear those heavy footsteps circling the cabin. My husband would say it was deer or elk, but deer don't pace methodically around a human dwelling, and sometimes, just sometimes, we'd hear that weird hooting whistle from the ridgeline above us. When that happened, even my husband would make sure the door was securely latched. Our son is in his late 50s now, with kids and grandkids of his own. He's a practical, level-headed guy, an engineer who deals in facts and measurements. But he has never wavered in his account of what happened that night. Not once in all these years. When his kids were teenagers and teased him about his monster story, I saw the look on his face. There was no doubt there, no hint that it might have been his imagination. Just a momentary flash of that same fear I'd seen when he was 5.5. A few years ago, when those Bigfoot shows started getting popular on TV, we were visiting for Christmas and one came on. Everyone was joking about it, but I caught my son staring at the screen with this look I can't really describe, like recognition mixed with old fear. He got up and left the room without saying anything. Later, I found him in the kitchen just staring out the window into the dark. "That's what I saw, Mom," he said quietly, without turning around. "I know how it sounds, but that's what was looking at me that night." I didn't question him. I've never questioned him about it since that night, actually. The terror I saw in my 5-year-old wasn't something that could be faked or imagined. Whatever he saw, he really saw it. And that's enough for me to believe him. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if that window had been bigger, or if the creature, whatever it was, had tried to get in. We were so isolated up there. The nearest neighbor was over a mile away. Nobody would have heard us. I still dream about it sometimes. In my dreams, I'm the one who wakes up and looks out that little window. In the dreams, I see exactly what my son described. That not quite human face, those eyes reflecting the moonlight. And in the dreams, it always reaches for the window, its massive hand splaying across the glass. I always wake up before it gets in, but the fear that follows me out of those dreams is as real as it was 52 years ago on that autumn night on Sugarloaf Mountain. Some things you never really get over. You just learn to live with them tucked away in the back of your mind. But I'll tell you this. I've never gone camping or hiking since then without wondering what might be watching from just beyond the tree line. And I never, ever ignore it when a child says they're afraid of something in the dark. Because sometimes there really is something there. Story 8. I still have nightmares about August 24th, 1969. I've tried to forget what happened, but I can't. I'm writing this now because I need to get it off my chest, and maybe someone here has had a similar experience and can help me make sense of it. I was 16 years old that summer. Me and 4 other boys from my high school decided to go camping at Bigfoot Lake in Curry County, Oregon. We'd been planning the trip for weeks, just a chance to get away before school started back up again. The area was beautiful but remote, about 25 miles southwest of Grants Pass, sitting at about 5,000 feet elevation. It's all steep timbered hills with a creek running through valleys. Perfect camping spot, or so we thought. We loaded up Tom's old station wagon with our gear, sleeping bags, tents, food, and probably more beer than we should have had at our age. The road got rougher the closer we got to our destination. We ended up parking the car along a stream bed because the road was too rough to continue. From there, we hiked a couple miles uphill to reach the campground. Setting up camp took longer than expected. By the time we finished, the sun was already setting behind the trees. We built a fire, cooked some hot dogs, and cracked open a few beers. Just normal teenage stuff, you know. We were laughing, telling stupid jokes, not a care in the world. God, I miss that feeling. As it got darker, the forest around us changed. During the day, it seemed welcoming, but at night, the shadows between the trees looked like they were hiding something. I remember thinking how quiet it was. No traffic noise, no distant voices, just the occasional hoot of an owl or the rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Around 11 at night, 3 of us were already in our sleeping bags, tired from the hike and ready to crash. But George realized he'd left his flashlight in the car. He said he needed it for the night. He was always afraid of the dark. We teased him a bit, but he insisted on going back to get it. "I'll be back in 20 minutes, tops," he said, grabbing a smaller backup light. I was drifting off to sleep when I heard it, a sound so loud and violent it jolted me fully awake. It was like a jeep crashing through dense brush, but there was no motor sound, just this massive crashing and breaking of branches. The sound carried all the way up to our campsite, clear as day in the still night air. I sat up immediately, as did the others. The noise had come from the direction of the car, from where George had gone. We called out for him, our voices echoing through the trees, but got no response. About 10 minutes later, George came running back into camp, out of breath and white as a sheet. "There's something down there," he gasped, struggling to catch his breath. "Something big. It was near the car when I got there. When it saw me, it took off through the brush. I've never heard anything make that much noise moving through the forest." We peppered him with questions. Was it a bear, a moose? But George just kept shaking his head. It was on 2 legs. I only saw it for a second before it crashed away, but it was standing upright, tall, really tall. We tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was seeing things in the dark. Maybe it was just a bear standing up momentarily. We even joked about Bigfoot to ease the tension. But George wasn't laughing. Eventually, we settled back down. George was too shaken to sleep, so he sat by the dying fire while the rest of us returned to our sleeping bags. I remember checking my watch before closing my eyes again. It was just after midnight. The next thing I knew, I was wide awake, my heart pounding in my chest. It took me a second to realize what had woken me. A sound, not just any sound, a scream, but calling it a scream doesn't do it justice. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard before or since. It was almost metallic, like steel being torn apart, but organic at the same time. It echoed through the valley, bouncing off the hills, making it impossible to tell exactly where it was coming from. But one thing was clear. It was loud, impossibly loud, like whatever made it had lungs the size of barrels. I looked at my watch. It was around 1 in the morning. The others were awake too, sitting up in their sleeping bags, eyes wide with fear. No one said anything. We didn't have to. We all knew this wasn't normal. Then we heard it again, and this time we could tell it was closer. The sound was coming from down by the stream in the direction of the car. Another scream tore through the night, and this one made my skin crawl. It wasn't just a random animal sound. There was something almost deliberate about it, like it was trying to communicate something, or intimidate something. Us, probably. "What the hell is that?" whispered Tom, his voice barely audible. Before anyone could answer, we heard it again, and now it was definitely moving, coming toward us, following the stream bed up to our campsite. 2 of the guys, Mike and Tom, grabbed the machetes we'd brought for clearing trails. They stood up, holding the blades out in front of them like that would somehow protect us from whatever was coming. The rest of us stayed in our sleeping bags, too terrified to move. "Don't make any noise," George whispered. "Maybe it'll just pass by." But it didn't pass by. For the next half hour or so, we were basically under siege. The creature, because at this point we knew it was some kind of living thing, circled our campsite. It moved on 2 legs. We could hear the distinct bipedal footsteps crushing the underbrush. Heavy footsteps, much heavier than any humans. And the screams. God, the screams. They continued the whole time, varying in pitch and duration. Sometimes they were short, sharp barks. Other times, long, drawn-out wails that seemed to go on forever. They didn't sound like any animal I knew. Not a bear, not a cougar, not a wolf. Nothing from this world. We stayed as still and quiet as possible. I was literally shaking with fear, my sleeping bag vibrating against the ground. I remember thinking, this is it. This is how I die. Because whatever was out there, it wasn't natural. It felt wrong. Like something that shouldn't exist was walking around just feet from where we lay. At one point, it came so close to the edge of our camp that I could hear it breathing, heavy, raspy breaths. I closed my eyes tight, not wanting to see what might appear at the edge of the firelight. The minutes crawled by like hours. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. We just lay there, listening to this thing as it moved around us, screaming its unnatural screams. Then, finally, the footsteps started to move away. The screams became more distant. It was leaving, following the stream back down the hill. When the sounds had faded somewhat, Mike whispered, "I think it's going away." Slowly, cautiously, we began to peek out from our sleeping bags. The campfire had died down to embers, casting just enough light to see the immediate area around us. That's when I saw it. In the distance, illuminated by the moonlight filtering through the trees, was a silhouette, a massive, hulking shape moving away from us down the slope. It was walking upright, on 2 legs, but it wasn't human. No human is that size. It must have been at least 8 feet tall, maybe more, with shoulders twice as wide as a man's. Its arms hung down almost to its knees. I only saw it for a few seconds before it disappeared into the darkness of the forest. But that brief glimpse was enough to burn the image into my memory forever. We spent the rest of the night huddled together, wide awake, machetes at the ready. Nobody suggested going after it. Nobody suggested trying to get a better look. We knew instinctively that would be suicide. As soon as the first light of dawn broke through the trees, we packed up our camp in record time. Nobody mentioned what we'd seen or heard. We just wanted to get out of there. The hike back to the car was tense. Every snapping twig made us jump. Every shadow between the trees looked like it might be hiding that massive shape we'd seen in the moonlight. When we reached the car, we found large, strange depressions in the soft ground nearby. They weren't clear enough to be definite footprints, but they were big, much bigger than any of our feet, and they were in a line, like something had walked there, and there were broken branches on some of the surrounding bushes, about 7 feet off the ground. We threw our gear in the car and got the hell out of there, the station wagon bouncing violently on the rough road as Tom drove as fast as he dared. Only when we hit the main highway did we finally start to breathe normally again. On the drive home, we tried to make sense of what had happened. What had we encountered? A bear seemed the most logical explanation, but bears don't walk upright for extended periods. They don't make sounds like what we heard, and they don't stand 8 feet tall. We made a pact not to tell anyone what we'd experienced. Who would believe us anyway? We'd sound crazy. But I've carried this memory for decades now, and sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, sweating. The echo of those metallic screams ringing in my ears. I've researched similar encounters over the years. Some people call what we saw a Bigfoot or Sasquatch. Maybe that's what it was, or maybe it was something else entirely. Something that has no name. All I know is that there's something out there in the wilderness of Curry County, Oregon. Something that walks on 2 legs, stands taller than any man, and makes sounds that shouldn't exist in nature. And I hope to God I never encounter it again. I've never gone camping since that night. I can't even bring myself to hike in deep forests anymore. Some experiences change you forever. And what happened at Babyfoot Lake on August 24th, 1969, is something I'll carry with me until the day I die. Story 9. I still get chills thinking about what happened last summer on Mount Blanca. I've been an outdoorsman for nearly 20 years, spent countless weekends in the Colorado backcountry, and never experienced anything that shook me quite like this. It was late August, perfect hiking weather in the Sangre de Cristo Range. Me, my buddy Mark, my brother Tyler, and 3 others from our regular hiking group had spent the day exploring around Lily Lake. The alpine scenery there is breathtaking. Crystal clear water reflecting the mountain peaks, surrounded by dense forest. We'd made this trip before, but this time would be different. The 6 of us had a great day fishing and exploring. By late afternoon, clouds started rolling in, and we decided to head back to our campsite at the base of the mountain. My brother Tyler, who's always been the athletic one, got restless waiting for everyone to pack up. He and the others, Jeff, Mike, and Chris, were eager to get back before the weather turned. "We'll see you guys at camp," Tyler called out, adjusting his bright red shirt before jogging down the trail with the others following behind. That left just me and Mark taking our time, enjoying the forest as the afternoon light filtered through the pines. We were maybe a mile into our descent when it happened. I was in mid-sentence, talking about planning our next trip, when something caught my eye through the trees to our right. About 40 to 50 yards away, something was moving through the timberline. At first, I thought it was just shadows playing tricks, but then Mark grabbed my arm. "Did you see that?" he whispered, his eyes wide. I nodded, my mouth suddenly dry. We both stood completely still, watching the area where we'd spotted movement. The forest had gone eerily quiet. No birds, no rustling leaves, nothing except our own breathing. Then it happened again. Between 2 tall pines, something moved. Not in the casual, meandering way an animal moves through the forest. This was deliberate, purposeful. A figure, definitely bipedal and tall, at least 6 feet, made one powerful, calculated jump from behind one tree to another. The movement was so fast I almost doubted what I was seeing, but it was unmistakable. The way it moved reminded me of a human lunging, but with an athletic ability I've never witnessed before. Its arms extended forward as it leapt, clearly separate from its legs, distinct limbs, not the body of a 4-legged animal. "What the hell was that?" Mark whispered, his voice barely audible. "I don't know," I replied, not taking my eyes off the spot where the figure had disappeared behind a tree. The strangest part? Despite how close it was and how large it appeared, there was almost no sound, no snapping branches, no rustling leaves, just the faintest thud as it landed. In a forest where even squirrels make noise moving around, this silence was unnatural. We waited, barely breathing for it to appear again. 5 minutes passed. 10. Nothing. Maybe it was Tyler messing with us? Mark suggested, though his tone suggested he didn't believe that himself. I considered it for a moment. My brother is about 6'2", definitely tall enough, and he loves pranks, has since we were kids. But something felt off about that explanation. Let's keep moving, I finally said. But stay alert. We continued down the trail, both of us constantly scanning the forest around us. Every shadow, every movement in my peripheral vision made my heart race. I've hunted elk in dense forest, tracked mountain lions, even had close encounters with bears, but I've never felt the kind of unease I felt in those woods that afternoon. About 30 minutes later, the forest opened up, and we could see our campsite ahead. The relief was overwhelming until a new worry hit me. If that wasn't Tyler in the woods, and it wasn't an animal we recognized, what was it? When we reached camp, the 4 guys who'd gone ahead were already there, setting up for dinner. Tyler was stoking the fire, his bright red shirt unmistakable against the green and brown backdrop of the campsite. "What took you guys so long?" he called out, grinning. Mark and I exchanged glances. My stomach dropped. There was no way Tyler could have been what we saw in the forest. He'd been here at camp the whole time. "Everything okay?" Jeff asked, noticing our expressions. "Yeah," I said automatically, though nothing felt okay. Just saw something weird on the trail. "Weird how?" Tyler asked, standing up from the fire. I hesitated, not wanting to sound crazy. These guys were all experienced outdoorsmen. We'd seen every animal native to these mountains. "We saw something moving through the trees," Mark finally said. "Something big, walking on 2 legs. The campsite went quiet. Mike chuckled nervously. "A bear, maybe. They stand up sometimes." I shook my head. It wasn't a bear. It moved too deliberately, made a jump between trees that I've never seen an animal make, had distinct arms and legs. "And it was completely silent," Mark added. "Like unnaturally silent." Tyler's smile faded. "Where exactly did you see this?" We described the location, about a mile up from camp, near where the trail bends around a cluster of old-growth pines. "That's impossible," Chris said slowly. Tyler was the second one back to camp, after Jeff. They've been here for almost an hour. "What exactly did it look like?" Tyler asked, his expression unreadable. I tried to organize my thoughts to describe something I'd only glimpsed for seconds. Tall, at least 6 feet, maybe more. Dark-colored, but I couldn't tell if that was fur or clothing or just shadows. It moved like a person, but not. More powerful, more agile. One moment it was behind a tree, the next it had leapt to another tree maybe 15 feet away. Just one fluid movement. "And you didn't hear anything?" Mike asked, skeptically. "Just the slightest thud when it landed," Mark confirmed. "No breathing, no vocalization, no branches breaking, nothing." The conversation died down as everyone processed this information. I could tell the others were skeptical, probably thinking we'd seen a deer or elk and our minds had played tricks on us. But Mark and I knew what we'd seen, or at least we knew what it wasn't. It wasn't any animal native to these mountains. As night fell, the incident kept replaying in my mind. The deliberate movement, the silence, the way it had seemed to watch us before making that leap. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it was, it had been aware of us, had been observing us. Around the campfire that night, Tyler mentioned that local Native American legends spoke of forest spirits in these mountains, entities that protected the wilderness and observed humans who entered their domain. I'd always dismissed such stories as myth and folklore, but sitting there in the darkness, with the forest pressing in around us, those legends suddenly felt more plausible. Sleep was difficult that night. Every sound outside my tent, the wind in the trees, small animals moving in the underbrush, made me tense up. I kept thinking about how we'd been observed, studied by something intelligent enough to move without making sound, strong enough to make impossible leaps between trees. The next morning, against my better judgment, Mark and I decided to hike back to the spot where we'd seen the figure. In daylight with the full group, we figured we'd feel safer. Maybe we'd find tracks or some other evidence of what we'd encountered. The area looked different in the morning light. Less mysterious, more familiar. We searched for nearly an hour, looking for footprints, broken branches, anything that might explain what we'd seen. "And there's nothing here," Jeff finally said, voicing what we'd all realized. But there was something. As we were about to leave, I noticed a small pile of stones stacked on a fallen log, 3 rocks balanced one on top of another. It might have been nothing, just rocks that happened to fall that way, but it looked deliberate, placed, and I swear it hadn't been there the day before, when Mark and I passed this same spot. We left the mountains that afternoon, and I've been trying to make sense of what happened ever since. I've researched local wildlife, looked into regional folklore, even reluctantly browsed forums about Bigfoot sightings in Colorado. Nothing quite matches what we experienced. What bothers me most isn't just what we saw, but the feeling that came with it. The distinct impression that we weren't simply spotting wildlife. We were being watched by something intelligent, something that moved with purpose and intent. Something that didn't want to be seen, but for just a brief moment, allowed itself to be. I've been back to those mountains twice since then, always with groups, always in daylight. I haven't seen anything unusual again. But sometimes, when I'm hiking through dense forest and the trail goes quiet, I get the prickling sensation on the back of my neck that I'm not alone, that silent eyes are watching, evaluating, from just beyond the tree line. And I remember that single powerful leap, the movement of something that doesn't quite belong in the world as I understand it. To this day, I don't know what we saw on Mount Blanca, but I know it wasn't human, wasn't any animal I recognize, and it's forever changed how I perceive the wilderness I thought I knew so well. Story 10. I've been debating whether to share this for decades. It happened back in the summer of 1970 when I was 9, almost 10 years old, and it's still as vivid in my memory as if it happened yesterday. I've tried explaining it away countless times, tried to convince myself it was just some logger or hunter messing with a couple of kids, but deep down I know it wasn't. What we heard and saw that day wasn't human, not even close. My buddy Brian and I were typical suburban kids who lived on the outskirts of a small town about 30 miles east of Seattle. This was long before kids stayed inside playing video games. Back then, summer meant freedom, riding bikes, building forts, and exploring the woods that surrounded our neighborhood. Our parents' rule was simple: be home before dark. As long as we followed that one command, we had the run of the place. That particular day was hot, but not sweltering, probably in the mid-80s. The sky was that perfect northwest blue you only get in summer with just a few wispy clouds. We'd packed our backpacks with peanut butter sandwiches, apples, and canteens of water. Brian had even brought his dad's compass, though we never really needed it. We knew those woods like the backs of our hands. We decided to hike along what the locals called Gates Road. Not a real road anymore, just an old, overgrown dirt path that loggers had used decades earlier. It cut through some of the densest forest in the area, winding its way towards some power lines, and eventually to a spot where older teenagers would sometimes camp out and party on weekends. During the week, though, it was deserted. Just miles of towering Douglas firs, western red cedars, and leafy alders, creating a canopy so thick that sunlight only reached the forest floor in scattered patches. We'd been walking for maybe an hour, taking our time, stopping to skip rocks across a small stream, pointing out interesting bugs and doing the stupid stuff kids do when they're wandering with no particular destination. The forest was alive with normal sounds, birds chirping, the occasional rustle in the underbrush from a squirrel or rabbit, the distant hammering of a woodpecker. Nothing felt off or strange, until it did. We were about 2 miles in, I'd guess. The path narrowed as it curved around a particularly dense patch of undergrowth. The trees on either side were so close together that their branches intertwined overhead, creating a shadowy tunnel. That's when everything changed. First came the silence. It wasn't gradual. It was like someone had flipped a switch. The birds stopped singing. The insects went quiet. Even the light breeze that had been rustling the leaves seemed to hold its breath. It was the kind of silence that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up, the kind that feels heavy, like it's pressing down on you. Brian and I both stopped walking at the same moment. We didn't say anything. We just looked at each other with that instinctive, something's wrong expression. He was about to whisper something when we heard it. I've spent years trying to accurately describe that sound. It wasn't anything I'd ever heard before or since. It started as a low, rumbling growl that you could feel vibrating in your chest more than hear with your ears. But then it changed, morphing into something like a scream, not human, not animal, something primal and ancient that bypassed rational thought and struck directly at some deep-rooted survival instinct. It came from about 50 feet ahead of us, just around the bend in the path, close, too close. Before we could even process the sound, the trees in front of us began to shake, not swaying gently like they would in a strong wind, but violently, as if something massive was pushing against them. One large alder, a tree at least a foot in diameter, bent so far to the side that sunlight suddenly burst through the canopy in a bright shaft that hit the ground right in front of us. The ground beneath our sneakers trembled, not like an earthquake, more like the vibration you feel when a heavy truck rumbles past your house. But we were miles from any road big enough for trucks. For what felt like minutes but was probably only seconds, Brian and I stood frozen. Then the growling scream came again, closer this time, and that broke our paralysis. We didn't discuss what to do. We didn't need to. Pure adrenaline took over, and we spun around and ran faster than I've ever run in my life. I remember my backpack thumping against my spine with each stride, my lungs burning as I gulped air, branches whipping against my face and arms as we veered off the path to take a shortcut we knew through the woods. I don't know if it followed us. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Something in my brain was screaming that looking back would be the worst mistake I could possibly make. So I just ran, focused on keeping Brian's red t-shirt in sight as we crashed through undergrowth and leaped over fallen logs. We covered what must have been half a mile in a few minutes, finally bursting out of the tree line and onto the gravel road that led back to our neighborhood. Only then did we stop, doubled over, hands on our knees, struggling to catch our breath. My heart was pounding so hard I could see my t-shirt jumping with each beat. "What? What was that?" Brian gasped, his face ghost white beneath his summer tan. I shook my head, still unable to form words. My throat felt raw, and I realized I must have been screaming as we ran, though I had no memory of it. We walked the rest of the way home in near silence, occasionally glancing back over our shoulders. The normal world seemed surreal after what we'd experienced. People mowing lawns, kids riding bikes, a woman walking her dog. How could everything be so normal when something so inexplicable had just happened? That evening at dinner, I tried to tell my family what we'd experienced. My older sister immediately rolled her eyes. My dad listened more patiently, but eventually suggested it was probably just some teenagers trying to scare us. "And they probably saw you coming and decided to shake the trees and make scary noises," he said, passing the mashed potatoes. You know how bored high school kids get in summer. I wanted to believe him. It would have been comforting to think it was just some 17-year-olds playing a prank. But even at 9 years old, I knew better. No teenager could make that sound. A sound that seemed to come from something with lungs bigger than my entire body. No teenager could shake trees that size or make the ground vibrate beneath our feet. My mum must have noticed something in my expression because she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Maybe you boys should stick closer to the neighborhood for a while," she suggested gently. I nodded, relieved not to have to argue the point. Brian and I didn't talk about it much after that day, not because we forgot, how could we, but because talking about it made it real in a way that was uncomfortable. We avoided Gates Road for the rest of that summer. By the following year, Brian's family had moved to Oregon, and I found new friends who wanted to explore different areas. As the years passed, I occasionally tried to research what might explain our experience. I read about black bears and cougars native to the Pacific Northwest, but neither made sounds remotely like what we heard. I learned that large animals can certainly shake vegetation, but not full-grown trees. The ground trembling still defies any explanation I can come up with. Then in my 20s, I started coming across stories about Bigfoot or Sasquatch sightings in that same general region. I was skeptical at first. Who isn't when it comes to stories of giant ape men in the woods? But some of the descriptions from witnesses matched elements of what Brian and I experienced. The unnatural silence before an encounter, the inhuman vocalizations, the strength to move trees, the heavy footsteps that could be felt through the ground. I've never been sure what to believe. I'm a practical person, always have been. I work in accounting, for crying out loud. My life is built around things that can be measured, verified, balanced. But that day in the woods refuses to fit into any rational framework I can construct. Here's what I know for certain. Something was in those woods that day. Something large, powerful, and utterly terrifying. Something that knew we were there and wanted us gone. Something that defied everything I thought I knew about the natural world. I've never gone back to Gates Road. I've never wanted to. Even now, 50 years later, the thought of those trees shaking and that otherworldly sound makes my chest tighten and my palms sweat. I live 2 states away now, and still I avoid dense forests when I can. Sometimes when I'm falling asleep at night, I find myself wondering what would have happened if we hadn't run, or worse, if we hadn't been able to outrun whatever was there. Other times, I wonder if it's still out there, moving silently through the deep woods of the Pacific Northwest, occasionally making its presence known to unfortunate hikers or curious kids. I've never told this story publicly before. My wife knows a version of it, though I've always downplayed how terrifying it truly was. My kids think it's just one of Dad's old stories, like how I used to walk 5 miles to school in the snow. But it wasn't just a story. It happened, and after all these years, I still can't explain it. The woods are different from what most people think. They're not just trees and undergrowth and wildlife. There's something more there. Something older and wilder than we can understand. Something that reminds you that humans aren't really at the top of the food chain, no matter what we like to believe. That day taught me that there are things in this world that don't fit into our neat categories, things that exist whether we acknowledge them or not. And sometimes, if you're unlucky enough, you might catch a glimpse of them, or hear their call, or feel the ground shake beneath their weight. And if that happens to you, I have only one piece of advice. Run. Run as fast as you can, and don't look back. Story 11. I've never told this story online before, but it's been eating at me for over 10 years now. I need to get this off my chest because I've exhausted every logical explanation, and I'm still completely baffled. This happened back in March 2013. My husband and I live near Campbell River on Vancouver Island in British Columbia. If you're not familiar with this part of Canada, it's heavily forested with mountains, lots of logging roads cutting through old and second-growth forest. It's beautiful, but isolated in many parts. That day started out pretty normal. It was drizzling, typical Pacific Northwest weather. Not pouring, just that constant light rain that seems to hang in the air. We headed out around mid-afternoon to collect firewood from one of the logging roads about 20 minutes from our property. My husband had spotted some good fallen cedar on a previous drive that would be perfect for our wood stove. My husband was 55 at the time and had worked as a logger for most of his life. He knows these woods like the back of his hand. The wildlife, the sounds, everything. He's not the jumpy type. In all our years together, I'd rarely seen him spooked by anything in the forest. We parked our pickup at a wide spot on this logging road and started loading some smaller pieces into the truck bed. The work was going well, despite the drizzle. It was around 5 in the evening, still light out, but getting towards that time when the forest starts to darken under the thick canopy of trees. I was bent over, picking up a chunk of wood when I heard it. This sound, this call, erupted from the trees to the left side of the road. It's hard to describe accurately, but it was a whooping sound, incredibly loud and two-toned. It started lower and rose in pitch like whoo. The volume was what struck me first. It cut through the rain and the trees like it was designed to travel, to be heard over distance. It wasn't muffled at all. I froze mid-bend. My husband was about 15 feet away from me, and he stopped too, a piece of wood in his hands. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice unusually tense. I nodded, still not moving, and right then the call rang out again, identical to the first, that same two-toned whooping noise that seemed to drill into my ears. But what happened next is what truly made my skin crawl. From the opposite side of the road, the right side from where I was standing, came a response. It was similar, but distinctly different. Higher pitched, with a slightly altered rhythm, but unmistakably the same type of call. They were talking to each other, across the road, with us in the middle. I looked at my husband, who was now scanning the tree line. His face had changed. His jaw was set tight, and he kept shifting his weight from foot to foot. I'd never seen him like this in the woods before. The calls continued, alternating sides. Left side would call, then right side would answer. Back and forth in a pattern that felt organized, intentional. These weren't random animal noises. They had structure. There was communication happening. The timing between them was consistent, like a conversation with perfect rhythm. This went on for about a minute, maybe slightly longer. It's hard to judge time when you're in that state of alert confusion, but it was long enough that there was no mistaking what was happening. Two separate beings were communicating with each other, using these loud, clear calls that I'd never heard before in all my years living near these forests. Neither of us moved. I remember my heart pounding in my chest so hard I could feel it in my throat. The rain continued to drizzle down, tapping on the hood of my jacket. My hands were starting to shake, not from cold, but from a primal fear I couldn't name. And then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Both calls ceased at almost exactly the same time, as if a switch had been flipped. That's when I noticed something else, something almost more disturbing than the calls themselves. The forest had gone completely silent. No birds, no distant frogs from the swampy area down the road. Nothing. It was like everything was holding its breath. My husband looked at me and quietly said, "We should get going." He didn't need to say it twice. We quickly tossed the last few pieces of wood into the truck bed, not bothering to organize them neatly as we normally would. I noticed his eyes kept darting to the woods on the left side of the road. Just before we got in the truck, I realized something else. The caller on the left, the first one we'd heard, seemed to be slightly farther away during its final calls than when it started, like it had moved position while calling. I didn't mention this to my husband until we were driving away. "I think it was moving," I said, when we were back on the main logging road. He nodded. I thought so too. As we drove, I gradually became aware that the normal forest sounds were returning. About a mile down the road, I could hear birds again. The unnatural silence had passed, but the memory of those calls stayed with me. When we got home, we tried to rationalize what we'd heard. My husband has encountered pretty much every animal in these forests during his decades as a logger. We went through the list. Wolves, we have them on Vancouver Island, but their howls don't have that two-toned whooping quality, and wolves don't typically call back and forth in that organized way. They tend to howl together. Coyotes, their yips and howls are completely different, higher pitched and more yappy. Bears. Black bears make all sorts of sounds, but nothing like what we heard. And they're typically not that vocal when they're just moving through the forest. Owls, too loud, too clear, and completely wrong tone. Elk, their bugling is distinctive and nothing like these whoops. Cougars, their screams are hair-raising but sound nothing like what we heard. We even looked up recordings of every local bird and mammal we could think of. Nothing matched, not even close. What stands out most in my memory even now is the deliberate nature of the calls. They weren't random animal noises, they were communication. There was a rhythm, a pattern. Call and response, like a conversation between two intelligent beings. My husband is a practical man. He doesn't believe in the supernatural and has always had a logical explanation for strange occurrences in the woods. But to this day, he gets a distant look in his eyes when I bring up what happened. He'll just shake his head and say, "I don't know what that was, Shannon." We've returned to that same logging road many times since then for firewood. We've never heard those calls again. I've spoken with a couple of other loggers and old-timers from the area, describing what we heard as best I could. Most just shrug it off or suggest conventional wildlife, but one older man who'd worked the island's forests for over 40 years got really quiet when I described it. He didn't offer an explanation, just said, "Some things in these woods don't have names. I'm not saying it was Bigfoot or Sasquatch. I'm not saying it was anything. I'm just telling you what we heard, and that in all the years since, neither of us has been able to explain it. Those calls were real, they were intelligent, and whatever made them was communicating right over our heads as we stood there in the rain. Sometimes when I'm alone in our property at dusk and the forest gets quiet, I find myself listening. Not for normal forest sounds, but for that distinctive two-toned whoop that cut through the trees with such unnatural clarity. Part of me hopes I never hear it again. But another part wonders what might have happened if we'd stayed just a little longer, or if one of us had called back. Whatever was out there that day in March 2013, it knew we were there, and they were talking about us. I'm certain of that. I can't prove it, and I can't explain it. But that's the one thing I know in my gut. Those calls were about us, and sometimes when I think about it, I still get goosebumps, remembering how we stood there, caught between two unseen creatures, having a conversation we couldn't understand. Story 12. I've never told many people about what happened that morning in August of '76. Most folks would think I'm crazy or making it up for attention, but I swear on everything I hold dear, every word of this is true. It's been almost 50 years, and I still get chills thinking about it. I was living in a small house on the outskirts of San Antonio back then, not far from Kelly Air Force Base. The property backed up to a decent stretch of woods with a train track running along the edge. It was quiet most of the time, just the occasional plane overhead or train passing by. I worked early shifts at a manufacturing plant in those days, so I was used to being up when most people were still fast asleep. That morning started like any other. My alarm went off at 2:45 and I dragged myself out of bed. Rex, my German shepherd, was sleeping at the foot of the bed like always. He lifted his head when I got up, but didn't move. He knew the routine. I'd let him out while I made coffee and got ready. I remember it was unusually humid that morning, the kind of thick air that makes your shirt stick to your back the moment you put it on. I had the small kitchen window open, hoping to catch any hint of a breeze while the coffee brewed. Everything was normal, totally ordinary, until it wasn't. I was pouring my first cup when Rex started barking. Not his usual, "there's a squirrel" bark or his "someone's walking by" bark. This was different, aggressive, almost frantic. The hair on the back of his neck was standing straight up, and he was fixated on something beyond our back fence. "What's got you so worked up, boy?" I asked, setting my cup down and moving to the back door. Rex wouldn't stop barking, growing more agitated by the second. I figured it might be a coyote or maybe even a deer. We'd get wildlife wandering through occasionally, though Rex usually didn't get this worked up about it. I grabbed the flashlight I kept by the back door and stepped out onto the small concrete patio. The yard was dark, except for the weak yellow glow from my kitchen window. The moon was just a sliver that night, not giving much light. Rex bolted past me, racing to the fence line, barking like I'd never heard before. His focus was laser-locked on the tree line about 30 yards beyond our property. "Rex, quiet down!" I hissed, conscious of my neighbors even though the closest house was a good distance away. "You'll wake the whole neighborhood." But he wouldn't stop. He was practically climbing the fence, his barking growing more intense. I swept my flashlight across the trees, but couldn't see anything unusual. Just shadows and brush, but Rex knew something was there. Dogs always know. I stood there for maybe 2 or 3 minutes, scanning back and forth with my light, trying to spot whatever had Rex so riled up. I was starting to think maybe he was just being neurotic when I heard the train. It wasn't unusual to hear trains at that hour. They ran freight through there at all hours, but this one was closer than I realized, and when it blew its whistle, that loud, piercing sound cutting through the night, something happened that I'll never forget as long as I live. There was movement in the brush. Not small movement like a rabbit or raccoon, something big. The whistle seemed to startle whatever it was, and suddenly, rising up from behind a clump of bushes about 40 yards away, was a figure. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. It was tall, impossibly tall, 7 feet at least. In the split second before it started moving, I remember thinking it might be a person. But that thought vanished instantly. This thing stood up on 2 legs and started running, not stumbling or lumbering like a bear might if it stood upright. This was running, natural bipedal strides. Its arms swung at its sides like a person's would. But this was no person. Even in the dim light, I could see it was covered in short brownish hair. All over. Not clothes, hair. Its proportions were all wrong for a human. Too big, too broad. The shoulders were massive, tapering down to a narrower waist. The head sat directly on those shoulders, hardly any neck visible. Rex was going absolutely ballistic now, throwing himself against the fence over and over. I was frozen in place, my flashlight beam shakily following this creature as it ran with these long, powerful strides across the clearing toward the denser woods. I've been around wildlife my whole life. I've seen bears, cougars, all kinds of animals. This wasn't any of those. The way it moved was too human-like, but it wasn't human, couldn't be human. The beam of my flashlight caught it fully for just a second as it crossed a more open patch, and I saw its profile clearly. The face wasn't flat like ours. It jutted forward slightly. Not a snout like an animal, but definitely not a human face. And the eyes caught the light for just an instant, reflective, like a deer's or dog's eyes in headlights. It covered ground so fast. Those strides must have been 4 or 5 feet each. It was at the edge of the denser woods within seconds, and then it was gone, swallowed by the trees and the darkness. I stood there, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. Rex was still barking, but it was different now, more anxious than aggressive, like he was relieved it was leaving, but still wanted to make sure it kept going. The train continued down the tracks, its lights visible through the trees, moving away, and then everything was quiet again, except for the fading sound of the train and Rex's occasional whine. I don't know how long I stood there, flashlight pointed at the spot where the thing disappeared. 5 minutes? 10? My legs felt like they were made of concrete. My mouth was bone dry. I kept thinking it might come back, maybe bringing others with it. That thought finally broke my paralysis, and I hurried back inside, practically dragging Rex with me. I locked the door, checked every window, and sat at my kitchen table with the lights on, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold my coffee mug. I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. There was no way I was leaving my house while it was still dark. As the sun came up, I convinced myself maybe I'd seen a bear. Maybe in the poor light and with my sleepy brain, I'd misinterpreted what I saw. Bears can stand on their hind legs, right? But deep down, I knew better. Bears don't run on two legs like that. Bears don't have that silhouette. Bears don't move that way. Later that day, I walked out to where our property met the tree line. I was hoping I wouldn't find anything, that maybe it really had been my imagination. But there they were. Tracks. Not clear prints like you'd see in mud, but definite depressions in the grass and dirt. Huge, spaced far apart, consistent with the long strides I'd witnessed. They led right into the woods, where the thing had disappeared. I didn't follow them. Some primal instinct told me not to go into those woods. That night, and for many nights after, I kept all the lights on. Rex wouldn't leave my side, not even to go to the bathroom without me right there. He knew what we'd seen wasn't normal. About a week later, I worked up the courage to ask my neighbor if he'd ever seen anything unusual in the woods. He laughed and said, "You mean besides the odd crackhead from the base wandering around?" But then his expression changed, got more serious. He told me his grandfather, who'd lived in the area his whole life, used to talk about the wild man of the woods. I didn't press for details. I didn't want to seem crazy. I moved away from that house 3 months later, made up some excuse about wanting to be closer to work. The truth was, I couldn't stand looking at those woods anymore, especially in the early morning hours when I had to leave for my shift. Every shadow, every rustle of leaves made my heart race. I've thought about what I saw nearly every day since then. I've read about Bigfoot sightings over the years, seen the blurry photos and shaky videos. Most seem fake or inconclusive. But I know what I saw. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a man in a suit. It was something else. That's why I'm finally sharing this now. I'm getting older, and I don't want this experience to die with me. I know how it sounds. I know most people will think I'm lying or that I was half asleep and confused. But I know what I saw that early August morning in '76, and sometimes late at night when I can't sleep, I wonder, did it see me too? Did it know what it was looking at? And most chillingly of all, was it alone out there, or are there more? I still have a dog, always a German Shepherd, always named Rex. Old habits die hard, I guess, and I still don't like looking out windows after dark. Some fears never really leave you, no matter how many years pass. And the fear of seeing that silhouette again, standing upright and watching from the tree line, that's a fear that's become part of who I am. Story 13. I still get goosebumps thinking about what happened that day in Bear Creek. It's been months, but I can't shake the feeling that something was watching us. I've never believed in this kind of stuff before, but now I'm not so sure. My husband John and I own this little getaway property northwest of Carson, Washington, about 6 miles out. Pretty remote. It's nothing fancy, just a small clearing where we set up camp by the creek. We've owned it for about 3 years now, and it's always been our peaceful escape from city life. That day in early March, we decided to drive out there with our friends Mike and Sarah and their 2 kids. It was mostly just to check on the property after winter, see how high the creek was running with all the snowmelt. Nothing special, just a quick day trip. The kids were excited about the adventure, and honestly, I was just looking forward to the fresh air. We arrived around noon. The day was crisp but not freezing, one of those late winter days where you can feel spring trying to break through. There was still patchy snow on the ground, maybe 3 or 4 inches in some spots, especially in the shaded areas. I remember noticing how quiet it was when we pulled up. No birds singing, no squirrels running around. At the time, I didn't think much of it. Our property has this cable stretched across the entrance to keep vehicles out when we're not there. John got out to unlock it, and I decided to walk ahead while everyone else was still getting their jackets and boots on. I just wanted to stretch my legs after the drive. That's when I saw them. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was looking at. In the snow, leading from the direction of our campsite, were these footprints, but not normal footprints. They were enormous. I'm not exaggerating when I say they were the biggest human-shaped prints I've ever seen. They came from our campsite area, angled toward the creek, and then disappeared into the tree line. I called out to John, trying to keep my voice steady so I wouldn't alarm the kids. "John, can you come look at this?" I remember my heart was pounding, but I was trying to be rational. Maybe it was a bear walking on its hind legs, but no, these were clearly foot-shaped, human-like. John came over, and his reaction told me I wasn't crazy. His face went serious in a way I rarely see. He's not a small guy, 6'1" and built solid. But when he tried to match the stride between these prints, he came up at least 2 feet short. 2 feet. The prints themselves had to be about 22 inches long. Mike came up behind us, leaving Sarah with the kids by the car. His face went pale when he saw what we were looking at. "What the hell made those?" he whispered. I knelt down to look closer, my hand hovering over one print. It had 5 toes. The snow had begun to melt and refreeze, so the edges weren't perfectly crisp, but you could clearly see the shape. A massive foot with 5 toes pressed deep into the snow. Whatever made it was heavy, really heavy. John tried to lighten the mood. "Bigfoot's been camping in our spot," he joked, but his laugh sounded hollow. I felt this cold feeling crawl up my spine. The woods around us suddenly seemed darker somehow, the trees closing in. I had the overwhelming sensation we were being watched. The kids were getting impatient, calling from the car, asking if they could get out and play. Sarah was trying to keep them occupied, but they were excited to explore. "Let's all stick together," John said, and there was something in his tone that made Mike and me exchange glances. John's not the type to get spooked easily. We walked back to the car, and John quietly filled Sarah in while I distracted the kids. We agreed, without really discussing it, that we wouldn't mention the footprints to them. No need to frighten them. Mike suggested we follow the tracks, see where they led. "Absolutely not," Sarah said immediately. I agreed with her. Whatever made those prints was massive, and I had no desire to find it. John, though, was curious. He's always been that way, wanting to understand things, solve puzzles. It's why he's good at his job as a mechanical engineer. "Just a quick look," he said. "We'll stay together." Against my better judgment, we decided the adults would follow the tracks while the kids stayed in the car. We told them we were just checking the creek level and would be right back. The oldest, Tyler, who's 10, wanted to come, but Sarah was firm. "Stay with your sister. We'll only be a few minutes." The 4 of us followed the prints toward the creek. They were spaced so far apart that it was almost like whatever made them, was running or taking enormous strides. When we reached the creek, the prints turned and ran parallel to the water for about 30 yards before heading into the tree line. We stopped at the edge of the trees. The forest beyond seemed unusually dark and still. No wind, no animal sounds, nothing. "I don't think we should go in there," Sarah whispered. John nodded slowly. "Yeah, let's head back." As we turned to leave, we heard it. A crack of branches breaking somewhere in the forest beyond. Not close, but not far either. We all froze. "Probably just a deer," Mike said, but he didn't sound convinced. We hurried back to the car. The kids were getting restless, but something in our expressions must have signaled this wasn't the time for complaints. "Let's go," John said, unlocking the car. "I think we've seen enough for today." No one argued. We got in our vehicles and drove away. In the rearview mirror, I watched our property disappear around a bend in the road. The entire drive home was tense and quiet. That night, after our friends left, John and I finally talked about what we'd seen. "Those weren't human prints," I said. "No human is that big." John nodded. "And did you notice there were no other animal tracks around? No deer, no rabbits, nothing." He was right. I hadn't consciously registered it at the time, but thinking back, the usual signs of wildlife were absent. No tracks, no sounds, just those massive footprints cutting through our property. For the next 10 days, I couldn't get those prints out of my mind. I kept thinking about how deep they were pressed into the snow, how far apart they were spaced. Whatever made them was big and heavy, too big to be human. After a lot of back and forth, I decided to contact the Skamania County Sheriff's Department. I felt a little silly writing the email. Who reports footprints? But I needed someone official to tell me I wasn't crazy. To my surprise, they took it seriously. Really seriously. 2 deputies came out the very next day. John took the day off work to meet them at the property. I couldn't go. I had meetings I couldn't miss. But John called me immediately afterward. They made casts, he said, his voice tight with excitement. They said they were some of the clearest prints they've seen. Prints of what? I asked, even though I knew what he was implying. They didn't say the word, John replied, but one of the deputies has been with the department for 20 years, said he's investigated similar reports before. A week later, those casts were on the front page of the Colombian newspaper. The article didn't come right out and say Bigfoot, but it heavily implied it. They quoted the sheriff saying these were consistent with other unexplained tracks found in the region over the years. When the deputies investigated, they found something else too, something we hadn't noticed. There were more prints beyond our campsite, heading deeper into the woods, and among them was a smaller set, like a child's version of the huge prints. The thought of that, a family of whatever these things were, sent shivers down my spine. We didn't go back to the property for almost a month. When we finally did, it was with a larger group. Safety in numbers, we thought. Everything looked normal at first glance. The snow had melted completely by then, but things felt different. The wildlife was missing. Normally our property is alive with squirrels, rabbits, even the occasional fox. Not anymore. The place was eerily quiet. While setting up camp, John found something by the fire pit. Droppings, larger than any animal scat I've seen. When he broke it apart with a stick, gross, I know, there was hair in it. Animal hair, like something had eaten a rabbit or squirrel whole. Later that afternoon, Mike spotted clumps of hair caught in branches about 8 feet up a tree. Not from a bear rubbing. This was higher than a bear could reach standing up, and it was on a skinny tree that wouldn't support a bear's weight. We stayed that weekend, but no one wandered off alone. We kept the campfire burning all night. I barely slept, listening to the forest sounds, jumping at every crack of a branch. Since then, we've been back a handful of times. Each visit, I notice things. Broken branches high up in trees, strange structures of sticks that don't look natural. Once, all our camping gear had been moved, not destroyed or stolen, just rearranged, as if something was curious about it. The last time we were there, about 3 weeks ago, I woke up around 3 in the morning, needing to use the bathroom. Our camp toilet is just a short walk from the tent, but that night, it felt like miles. As I hurried back to the tent, I heard heavy breathing from the tree line. Not animal panting, but deep, rhythmic breaths, like someone trying to be quiet but unable to completely silence their breathing. I froze, my flashlight beam shaking wildly as I swept it across the trees. I saw nothing, but the breathing stopped the moment my light passed over that spot. I ran back to the tent and woke John, but when we listened together, the forest was silent again. We still go to our property. I know that probably sounds crazy after everything I've told you, but it's our place, and part of me refuses to be driven away by fear of the unknown. But we're careful now. We always go in groups. We never leave food out. We make noise when we arrive, so nothing is surprised by our presence, and I never, ever go into the woods alone. I've researched similar encounters since this all started. Some people report feeling threatened by these creatures, but we haven't experienced that. Whatever visits our property seems more curious than aggressive. It's watching us, learning about us. Sometimes at night, when the fire burns low and everyone else is asleep. I sit alone and stare into the darkness beyond our camp. I can't see anything, but I know it's there, watching. And sometimes, just sometimes, I think I hear those deep, heavy breaths again. Story 14. I've been sitting on this for a long time, almost 40 years now. I've told a few close friends, but I've never shared it publicly. I guess I was afraid people would think I was crazy or making it up for attention. But I'm getting older now, and I feel like I need to get this off my chest while I still remember all the details clearly. This happened back in the summer of '86 in Lewis and Clark County, Montana. I was going through some personal stuff at the time and decided I needed to get away from everything for a weekend. No people, no noise, just me and nature. I'd been camping in that area before and knew some secluded spots that were perfect for solitude. I drove my old pickup several miles off the main dirt road until I found this perfect little clearing near a creek. It was beautiful. Tall pines surrounding a small meadow with a gentle stream nearby, providing white noise. No other campers around for miles. Exactly what I needed. Setting up camp was routine. I pitched my two-person tent, gathered firewood, and arranged my little campsite just the way I liked it. I remember feeling this immense sense of relief as I sat by my campfire that evening, cooking some beans and hot dogs. The stress was melting away with every minute I spent out there. The sun set, painting the sky in these incredible oranges and purples, and I just sat there drinking it all in, along with a couple beers from my cooler. I didn't stay up particularly late. Without the distractions of TV or other people, I found myself getting naturally tired around 10. By 10:30, I had doused my fire properly, stowed my food in the cooler. Bears were always a concern, and crawled into my sleeping bag with my flashlight and a paperback western I'd brought along. I fell asleep quickly to the sound of the creek and the occasional hoot of an owl. It was perfect until it wasn't. I woke suddenly, completely alert in that way that tells you something isn't right. The inside of my tent was pitch black. My watch's luminous dial showed it was around 2 in the morning. At first, I wasn't sure what had woken me. Maybe a dream. Then I heard it. Movement. Something was moving around at the edge of my clearing. Growing up in Montana, I was familiar with the sounds of wildlife. Deer make a certain kind of noise when they step on twigs and brush. Bears have a heavier sound and sometimes snort or huff. This was different. Heavier than a deer for sure, but more deliberate than a bear. There was a rhythmic quality to it that made the hair on my neck stand up. I lay perfectly still in my sleeping bag, barely breathing. Whatever was out there, I figured the best strategy was to wait for it to move on. Maybe it was just passing through. I mentally checked my surroundings. My cooler was closed tight. No food was left out. There shouldn't be anything attracting wildlife to my camp. The sounds continued for what felt like forever, but was probably only a couple of minutes. It wasn't moving away. If anything, it seemed to be moving closer to my tent, still staying near the tree line. I could hear branches shifting, and the unmistakable sound of something large stepping on the forest floor. My heart was pounding so hard I thought whatever was out there might hear it. I slowly reached for my flashlight, keeping my movements as minimal as possible. My hand was shaking as I gripped it. I debated whether to turn it on. Would light scare it away or provoke it? But I needed to know what I was dealing with. I clicked the flashlight on and pointed it toward the sounds, my hand trembling so badly the beam jumped around. What I saw in that beam of light has haunted me for decades. Standing at the tree line, about 40 feet from my tent, was a figure that simply shouldn't exist. It was massive, easily 7 feet tall, maybe more. Its body was covered in dark brown hair, thick and matted in some places. It had this incredibly wide shoulder span, much broader than any human I'd ever seen, and arms that hung down longer than they should. The creature took a step forward into the clearing, and I'll never forget the sound, a heavy thud as its foot hit the ground. My flashlight beam was shaking so badly I could barely keep it focused. I was terrified, but couldn't look away. Then it stopped, and it looked directly at me. I could feel its gaze through the thin nylon of my tent. The flashlight beam caught its eyes for just a moment, dark, but somehow reflective like a deer's eyes, but different. I could only make out the basic outline of its head, broad, with wide features, not quite human, but definitely not like any animal I recognized. It tilted its head slightly, almost like it was studying me. That small gesture was somehow more terrifying than anything else. It suggested intelligence, curiosity. This wasn't just some animal wandering through. We stayed like that, locked in this bizarre standoff, for what felt like minutes but was probably only seconds. My mind was racing, trying to process what I was seeing. It didn't match anything I knew existed. The words Bigfoot or Sasquatch flitted through my mind, but I'd always considered those stories to be campfire tales, not reality. The creature took another step forward, and my heart nearly stopped. It was close enough now that I could see how its hair moved slightly in the night breeze, close enough that I could see the massive bulk of its chest, rising and falling as it breathed. Then it just stopped again, still watching me. I slowly reached for the zipper of my tent, trying to make as little noise as possible. My camping knife and flare gun were in my backpack just inside the tent door. If this thing decided to charge, I wanted something, anything, to defend myself with. My fingers touched the cold metal of the zipper, and I started to ease it down. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the quiet night. The creature's head turned slightly at the noise, focusing more intently. Before I could get the zipper more than a couple inches down, the creature suddenly turned away. It didn't run or sprint. It just turned and walked back toward the trees with these long, fluid strides. Each footfall made that same heavy thud on the forest floor. In seconds, it had disappeared into the darkness of the forest, the sound of breaking branches marking its path. I sat frozen in my tent, flashlight still pointing at where it had been, for I don't know how long. My whole body was shaking. I kept expecting it to come back, maybe approach from a different direction. Every sound from the forest suddenly seemed threatening. There was no way I was going back to sleep. I sat upright in my sleeping bag all night, knife in one hand, flare gun in the other, flashlight balanced on my knee, pointing at the tent door. I kept hearing sounds, branches snapping, movement in the underbrush. But I couldn't tell if it was my imagination, normal forest noises, or if that thing was circling my camp. The longest night of my life finally gave way to dawn. As the first grey light filtered through my tent, I became aware of just how exhausted and stiff I was. I hadn't moved from my alert position for hours. I waited until full daylight before I cautiously unzipped my tent and peered out. The clearing looked normal. Birds were singing. It all seemed so ordinary that for a brief moment I wondered if I dreamed the whole thing, but I knew I hadn't. I packed up camp faster than I ever had before. No coffee, no breakfast, just throwing everything into my truck as quickly as possible. As I was rolling up my tent, I kept glancing at the tree line where I'd seen the creature. Something compelled me to go look. I approached the spot cautiously, knife still in my hand. When I reached the area where it had been standing, I found disturbed vegetation, broken branches about 7 or 8 feet up on some of the trees, which matched with its height. The grass and undergrowth were flattened in a path leading deeper into the forest. Something large had definitely moved through here. I looked for footprints, but couldn't find any distinct ones. The ground was covered with pine needles and forest debris, not ideal for leaving clear tracks. Part of me was relieved. I wasn't sure I wanted to see what kind of footprint that thing would leave. I followed the disturbed vegetation for about 20 feet into the woods before my nerve failed me. What if it was still out there watching me? I hurried back to my campsite, threw the last of my gear into the truck and got the hell out of there. The drive back to civilization was a blur. My mind kept replaying what I'd seen, trying to rationalize it. Could it have been a bear standing on its hind legs? No. The proportions were all wrong. A man in some kind of costume, out here, miles from nowhere, in the middle of the night. It made no sense. I've spent decades trying to explain what I saw that night. I've read books on wildlife, looked at reports of unusual sightings, even reluctantly dipped into Bigfoot research. Nothing has fully satisfied me. All I know is what I saw, a massive, hair-covered, humanoid creature that moved with purpose and intelligence through the Montana wilderness. I never went camping alone again, and I've never returned to that spot in Lewis and Clark County. Some things once seen change you forever. I still don't know what it was I encountered that night, but I know it was real, and I know it's still out there. Story 15. I still don't sleep well some nights. It's been 5 years since that camping trip in the Smokies. But I swear I can still hear those sounds when everything gets too quiet. I've been lurking on this forum for months, reading other people's stories, trying to make sense of what happened to me and my buddies. I guess it's time I finally wrote it down. This happened in July of 2018. Me, Kevin, and Tyler had been planning this backcountry trip for months. We're all experienced hikers, nothing hardcore, but we'd done plenty of weekend trips before. This time we wanted to get away from the tourist spots and really disconnect, so we chose this remote trail in the Great Smoky Mountains that led to a small valley surrounded by ridges. The hike in was gorgeous. It was hot as hell, but the trail followed this crystal clear creek most of the way, and the forest was so thick and green, it felt like walking through another world. We weren't carrying much, just our small tents, some food supplies, fishing gear, and the usual camping stuff. The plan was to fish, hike, and just chill out for 3 days. The first day and night went exactly as planned. We set up camp near the creek, caught some trout, built a small fire, and just hung out. The stars that night were unbelievable. You forget how many there are when you live near a city. The forest was alive with normal sounds, crickets, frogs, the occasional owl, the creek bubbling nearby, nothing unusual at all. The second day we spent most of our time fishing and exploring the valley. As the sun started to set, we headed back to camp and got our fire going again. That's when things started getting wrong. I remember checking my watch. It was around 8:45 in the evening. The sun had just dipped behind the western ridge, but there was still plenty of light. I was getting our food together when I realized something felt off. It took me a second to figure out what it was. The forest had gone completely silent, and I mean completely. No crickets, no frogs, no birds. Even the creek seemed quieter somehow, like the water was trying not to make noise. I looked at Kevin, and he was already looking at me with this confused expression. "You hear that?" he whispered. "I don't hear anything," I said. "That's the problem." Tyler was poking at the fire, but he stopped and looked up. "What's going on?" Before either of us could answer, we heard it. From the ridge to the east of us came this distinct sound of rock striking rock. Crack! It was loud enough to echo across the entire valley. We all froze. "Probably just some hikers," Kevin said, but his voice was tight. Then it came again. Crack! And again, crack! The sound was moving, traveling along the ridgeline like whatever was making it was walking the perimeter of the valley. "That's not hikers," Tyler said. "That's too loud, man." He was right. The sound was massive, like boulders being slammed together, and it kept moving, circling us from above. Then came the yell. Jesus Christ, that yell. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before. Not an animal, not a person. It was this deep, powerful, almost guttural howl that seemed to physically press against my chest. It felt like the air itself was vibrating. It came from the same direction as the rock sounds, somewhere high on the eastern ridge. Before the echo of that first yell even faded, another one answered from the northern ridge, then another from the west. The sounds overlapped, echoing and bouncing around the valley until it seemed like the entire forest was screaming at us. We all jumped up at that point. Tyler grabbed a big stick from our firewood pile. Kevin pulled out his hunting knife. I just stood there, feeling like my legs had turned to concrete. "What the fuck is that?" Tyler kept saying. "What the fuck is that?" The rock-knocking sounds were getting closer, and we could hear something else now. Heavy footsteps, branches snapping, brush being pushed aside. Whatever it was big, and it was coming down from the ridge toward our camp. We huddled together near the fire, trying to see into the darkness beyond its light. That's when I saw it for the first time. Just a massive shape moving between the trees, maybe 50 feet from camp. It was tall, way taller than any of us, with broad shoulders. I only caught a glimpse, but when it turned its head, I swear to God, its eyes reflected our firelight and glowed red for a split second. Kevin saw it too. "Holy shit," he whispered. "Did you see that?" Before I could answer, the thing picked up 2 rocks and slammed them together. Crack! The sound was like a gunshot now that it was closer. We all flinched. Then it did something that still haunts my nightmares. It let out another one of those bone-chilling yells and slammed the rocks against a tree trunk so hard I could hear the bark splinter. Then it hurled one of the rocks into our clearing. The thing landed maybe 6 feet from our fire, a stone the size of a bowling ball. For what felt like forever, but was probably an hour, this thing stalked our camp. It never came fully into the firelight, but it circled just beyond it, sometimes slamming rocks together, sometimes slamming them against trees, occasionally letting out those ear-splitting yells. Every now and then, when it passed close to the fire's glow, we'd catch glimpses of it. A massive body covered in dark hair, those impossibly broad shoulders, long arms that hung lower than a normal person's would. It moved with this weird combination of power and agility that didn't seem natural for something so big. We were frozen in place. None of us said a word. What the hell could we do? We were miles from the nearest road, in the dark, with something circling our camp that I was becoming increasingly certain wasn't human. Then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The footsteps faded away up the ridge. The forest stayed silent, but the immediate sense of threat diminished. We stayed awake all night, feeding the fire until it was practically a bonfire, not daring to get into our tents or even move away from each other. When the first grey light of dawn finally came, we were still sitting there, exhausted and terrified. Once it was light enough to see clearly, we started looking around our camp. What we found made my blood run cold. There were footprints circling our entire campsite. Huge, barefoot prints pressed deep into the soil. Some were clear enough that I could see toe impressions. They were easily 16 inches long. The trees around our camp had damaged bark at chest height and higher. Where the rocks had struck them, and that boulder it had thrown, it must have weighed 30 pounds. We didn't say much. We just packed our stuff as fast as we could and got the hell out of there. The hike back to the trailhead was a blur. Every sound made us jump. Every shadow between the trees seemed to move. None of us spoke about what had happened until we were in the car and miles away from the mountains. "That was a Bigfoot," Tyler finally said. "I know how that sounds, but that was a fucking Bigfoot." Kevin and I didn't argue. What else could it have been? No human could make those sounds or move like that. No known animal throws rocks or knocks them together as signals. It's been 5 years, and I've never gone back to the Smokies. I've tried to rationalize what happened. Maybe it was some kind of territorial bear behavior we misinterpreted. Maybe it was other hikers playing an elaborate prank. But deep down, I know better. The sound of those stones cracking together, the power of those yells that physically shook the air around us, the glimpses of that massive hair-covered body moving with impossible stealth for its size. These weren't things my mind invented. I've researched Bigfoot accounts since then, and what's freaked me out the most is how common the rock-knocking behavior is in other people's stories. How would we have known about that specific detail if we hadn't experienced it? Why would my brain create such a specific behavior that matches what other people report? I don't expect everyone to believe me. Hell, sometimes I wish I could convince myself it wasn't real. But 5 years later, I still wake up sometimes hearing those rocks slamming together, feeling that yell in my chest, seeing those red eyes reflecting our firelight. And I know what I experienced was real. I don't know if it was trying to scare us off or communicate with us or what. But something intelligent and powerful was in those woods that night, something that shouldn't exist according to science but absolutely does. I've never felt so small and vulnerable as I did sitting by that fire, realizing we weren't alone, and we definitely weren't at the top of the food chain out there. Story 16. I still can't believe I'm finally writing this down. For 7 years, I've told almost nobody about what happened that night in the Alaskan wilderness. Part of me was afraid people would think I'm crazy. The other part was just scared that talking about it might somehow bring it back. I'm a carpenter based out of Anchorage. Back in October of 2015, I took a job that seemed pretty straightforward, fixing up this old hunting cabin on the Kenai Peninsula. The owner was some rich guy from Seattle who used it maybe once a year for moose hunting. The cabin needed serious work, new support beams, patching holes in the roof, reinforcing the porch, that kind of stuff. The pay was good, and I figured I'd camp out there for about a week to get everything done. This wasn't my first remote job. I've been working construction in Alaska for almost 2 decades, so being alone in the wilderness didn't bother me. The cabin was seriously isolated, though. We're talking about a 2-hour ATV ride from the nearest access point, then another mile hike through thick forest. No cell service, no neighbors, nothing but trees, mountains, and wildlife. The first couple nights were peaceful. I'd work all day, cook something simple for dinner on the old wood stove, read by lantern light, then crash in the small bedroom. The cabin was basic. 1 main room with a kitchenette, a tiny bedroom, and a covered porch. Just the essentials. I actually enjoyed the quiet after living with Anchorage's constant background noise. Then came October 14th. I remember the date clearly because I'd written it on my work notes that morning. The day started normal. I was outside working on replacing some rotted boards on the porch. Around 4 in the afternoon, I noticed something odd. The forest had gone completely silent. If you've spent time in the woods, you know they're never actually quiet. There's always birds, squirrels, wind in the trees, something, but suddenly nothing, not even insects buzzing, just this heavy, waiting silence. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I've been around enough bears and moose to know when something's watching you. I scanned the tree line but couldn't see anything unusual. Still, that feeling of being observed was overwhelming. I decided to finish up early and get inside. The sun sets early in October up here, and by 5:30 it was already getting dark. I heated up some canned stew, checked my supplies, and tried to shake off that uneasy feeling. I kept my rifle propped against the wall near me, just a precaution. Round 8, I started getting ready for bed. The silence outside remained unnatural, pressing against the cabin like a physical thing. At about 9:30, I was sitting on the bed untying my boots when it happened. Wham! Something hit the side of the cabin with such force that the whole structure shook. Dust sifted down from the ceiling beams. The sound wasn't like a branch falling. This was deliberate, like someone had slapped the wall with tremendous force. My first thought was bear. We get black bears and grizzlies out here, and they sometimes investigate cabins looking for food. I grabbed my flashlight and rifle, heart hammering in my chest. Before I could decide what to do, another impact hit the back wall near the bedroom. Wham! Even harder than the first. A coffee mug vibrated right off the counter and shattered on the floor. I stood frozen, listening. What I heard next made my blood run cold. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps circling the cabin. Not the padding of a bear on all fours, but the distinct rhythm of something walking upright. The weight of each step made small objects vibrate on the shelves. Then came a sound I'll never forget, a deep guttural huffing, like something with massive lungs exhaling forcefully. It came from just outside the wall, maybe 3 feet from where I stood. Whatever it was right there, separated from me by just a few inches of wood. I crept to the window, keeping low. With trembling hands, I parted the curtain just enough to peek out. The moon was nearly full that night, casting everything in pale blue light. At first, I saw nothing. Then a massive shape moved between the trees at the edge of the clearing. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. It was tall, far taller than any man, taller even than a bear on its hind legs. It had a bulky, powerful build with long arms. The silhouette was shaggy, clearly covered with hair, and the head had this strange, conical shape, sloping up from what seemed like no neck at all into a pointed crown. It was only visible for a few seconds before it moved back into deeper shadows. I let the curtain fall and backed away from the window, trying to control my breathing. My hands were shaking so badly I had to set the rifle down to avoid accidentally firing it. For several minutes, there was nothing, just silence. I started to wonder if my mind was playing tricks on me. Then it started again. Wham! A single blow to the front wall this time. Then silence. Wham! Wham! 2 quick hits on the side wall. It was like it was testing the structure, looking for weaknesses, or maybe just letting me know it was still there. The door rattled violently, as if something had pushed against it. I'd secured it with the heavy wooden bar, thank God. The windows were small, too small for anything large to get through. I was safe inside, at least for now, but the feeling of being hunted, of being prey, was overwhelming. This continued for what felt like forever. The cabin would shake with impacts. Then there would be silence, then heavy footsteps, then another blow. I checked my watch obsessively. Just before midnight, there was a new sound, a long, scraping noise that ran the entire length of the back wall, like massive claws or fingers dragging across the wood. Then came the most terrifying moment of all. From the corner of the porch came a loud crack, the unmistakable sound of wood snapping with tremendous force. Not the cabin wood, but something outside. I summoned my courage and peered out the front window toward the noise. In the moonlight, I could see that a young tree, a birch about 6 inches thick that had stood at the corner of the property, was now bent and partially snapped about 7 feet up its trunk, as if something had just casually broken it. It was a clear message, a display of power. Whatever was out there wanted me to know what it could do. I spent the rest of the night huddled in the corner of the main room, rifle across my knees, jumping at every sound. Around 2 in the morning, the noises gradually stopped. The forest remained silent, but the feeling of being watched never faded. When dawn finally came, I waited another hour before working up the courage to go outside. The morning was crisp and clear, perfectly normal. Birds were singing again. If it wasn't for the evidence in front of me, I might have convinced myself it had all been a nightmare. But the evidence was undeniable. The stack of replacement boards I'd left on the porch had been knocked over, and one thick piece of lumber was snapped nearly in half. In the soft soil around the cabin were impressions, not clear footprints, but depressions from something extremely heavy. The birch tree was indeed partially broken, its pale trunk splintered at a height well above my head. Most disturbing were the marks on the back wall. Long, parallel scratches ran across the wood siding about 8 feet off the ground. I'm 6'1", and I had to stand on my tiptoes and reach up to touch the bottom of the marks. Whatever made them had to have been massive. I examined the broken saplings at the forest edge. Branches were snapped at heights I couldn't reach without jumping, and several small trees were pushed aside or bent. Based on everything I saw, what I'd glimpsed the night before had to have been at least 8.5 feet tall, with shoulders nearly 4 feet wide. The shape I'd seen was unmistakably covered in dark, shaggy hair, with that distinctive conical head and heavy brow. I didn't waste any time. I packed essential tools, locked the cabin, and hiked out that morning. I called the owner from the first place I got cell service and made up something about a family emergency. 2 weeks later, when I'd gathered my nerves, I went back, but only during daylight hours. I'd drive in at dawn and leave well before sunset, refusing to stay overnight. It took longer to finish the job this way, but there was no way in hell I was spending another night there. I never told the owner what happened. What would I say? That his cabin was being stalked by what could only be described as a Sasquatch, that something straight out of native legends had tried to break in. He'd think I was insane or on drugs. It's been 7 years, and I still don't know what to make of what happened that night. All I know is that it ended my sense of security in Alaska's backcountry. I still work construction, still take remote jobs, but I never stay overnight in isolated areas anymore. To this day, I sometimes wake up in a cold sweat, thinking I hear that heavy huffing sound outside my window. The memory of those pounding fists against the walls and that silhouette moving between the trees haunts me. Whatever it was that stalked the cabin that night, it wasn't just an animal. There was intelligence behind those actions, purpose. It was sending me a message, and the message was clear. I didn't belong there. That was its territory, and I was the intruder. Story 17. I've been hesitant to share this for months now, not because I'm worried people won't believe me, I'm way past caring about that, but because I still can't make sense of what happened. I've been driving trucks for almost 20 years, and you see some weird stuff on the road, wildlife, accidents, people doing crazy things in their cars, thinking no one can see them. But nothing like this. This happened back in April, when I was hauling a load from Denver to Spokane. It was a beautiful, clear day, around 2 in the afternoon, not too hot, not too cold. Perfect driving weather. My friend Margie was riding with me on this run. She's not officially my co-driver, but she's got her CDL and sometimes comes along on the longer hauls to keep me company and split the driving when I need a break. We were somewhere in western Montana on one of those rural highways that cuts through nothing but wilderness for miles. I remember we'd just passed through a small town, if you can even call it that, mostly just a gas station and a couple houses. I don't even think it had a name on the map. We'd been driving for about 4 hours since our last stop, chatting about nothing important, just passing the time. The music was playing low, some classic rock station that kept cutting out every few minutes. I remember being annoyed by that. Margie was eating some trail mix and complaining about how all the good nuts were gone and it was just raisins left. Normal stuff, you know? Just another day on the road. Then we came to this bridge. It wasn't particularly long, maybe 200 feet, crossing over what looked like a shallow creek or small river. The bridge had these solid concrete rails on either side, about 4 feet high. You couldn't see through them to the water below unless you were really tall or standing up, which obviously I wasn't while driving. As we hit the middle of the bridge, I glanced to my right, through the passenger window. There's this weird thing that happens sometimes when you're driving. Your eyes just wander for a split second. That's when I saw it. Below the bridge, walking along the rocky bank of the creek, was this thing. At first, my brain tried to make it a person. You know how your mind does that? Tries to make sense of something by turning it into something familiar. But this wasn't a person. Not even close. It was tall. I'd guess 7 feet at minimum. Walking upright on 2 legs, but not like a human walks. There was something different about the gait. Fluid, but powerful. It was covered completely in dark brown hair, almost black in some places. Not fur, but hair. Like human hair, but thicker, shaggier. The thing that caught my attention first were its arms. They hung much lower than a person's would. Even from above, I could tell they were disproportionately long, swinging slightly as it walked. The hands were massive. "Holy shit," I remember saying. Not yelling, not screaming, just those two words barely above a whisper. Margie immediately said, "You see it too." Her voice was tight, like she was trying really hard to sound calm. I nodded, not taking my eyes off the thing. It was walking along the bank, through ankle-deep water in some spots, over rocks in others. The water didn't seem to bother it at all. Its feet and ankles were enormous. The ankles looked as thick as the actual legs, like tree trunks. The hair seemed almost groomed in a weird way, not matted or wild like you'd expect from an animal, but not styled either, just maintained somehow. As we crossed the bridge, I could see some patches on its arms and elbows where the hair was thinner, and I could make out flesh underneath. It was a grayish-brown color, not like human skin. The creature never looked up, not once, just kept walking, staring straight ahead like it had somewhere to be. Like crossing under bridges while humans drove overhead was the most normal thing in the world. The whole sighting couldn't have lasted more than 5 or 6 seconds. Then we were past the bridge, and the concrete rails blocked our view. I remember gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. I wanted to stop the truck, to back up, to see it again, to confirm I wasn't hallucinating. But there was nowhere to pull over a big rig right after the bridge, just narrow shoulders and a guardrail. By the time there was a spot wide enough, we would have been half a mile past where we saw it. "Did you—" Margie started. "Yeah," I said. "I saw it." "It was heading north," she said. That's when things got even weirder. I turned to her, confused. "What?" "No, it was going south." She looked at me like I was crazy. I saw it clear as day. It was walking north, same direction we were driving. "That's impossible," I said. "It was walking south. I watched it the whole time." We went back and forth like this for several minutes. Both of us were absolutely certain about what we'd seen. Both of us described the same creature in almost identical detail. The height, the hair, the massive ankles and feet, the longer than normal arms. But Margie swore it was walking north, and I was equally certain it was walking south. How could we both see the exact same thing moving in opposite directions? I started to feel sick to my stomach. Not scared exactly, just wrong. Like reality had just shown me a glitch I wasn't supposed to see. "We need to go back," Margie said after a while. Part of me wanted to, but a bigger part couldn't handle the idea of seeing that thing again. Or worse, going back and finding nothing at all. I'm not usually one to spook easily, but this was different. This wasn't just seeing something unexpected. This was seeing something impossible. "We can't," I said. "We're on a schedule, and there's nowhere to turn this rig around for miles." That was true, but it was also an excuse. I didn't want to go back, and I think Margie was relieved too, even though she'd suggested it. For the next hour, we barely spoke. The radio kept playing, cutting out every few minutes like before, but neither of us moved to fix it. I just kept replaying those few seconds in my mind. The way it moved, the way its hair looked in the sunlight, the casual, purposeful way it walked, like it had somewhere important to be. "It wasn't a bear," Margie finally said, breaking the silence. "No. It wasn't a person in a costume. Definitely not." "So, what was it?" she asked. I shrugged. "You know what it was." Neither of us said the word. We didn't need to. We both knew. The rest of that drive was the longest of my life. We stopped for food a couple hours later, but neither of us was hungry. We just sat in this dingy truck stop diner, picking at cold fries and drinking coffee that tasted like it had been sitting on the burner since morning. "Maybe we saw 2 different ones," Margie suggested. "Maybe there were 2 of them, and you saw one going south while I saw another going north." That made sense, logically, but it didn't feel right. In the exact same spot? At the exact same time? Both looking and moving the exact same way? She didn't have an answer for that. After we got back on the road, Margie took over driving. I couldn't sleep, though. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that thing walking. By nightfall, we'd made it to our destination and dropped off our load. We got a motel room, separate beds, we're just friends. But I don't think either of us slept much. The next morning over breakfast, we made a pact not to tell anyone else about what we'd seen. Who would believe us anyway? And even if they did, what would it change? We couldn't prove anything. We didn't have photos or videos, just our word and our conflicting accounts of which direction it was walking. We looked up that bridge later, trying to figure out exactly where we'd been. Turns out it crosses a creek called Blackfoot River, which felt like some cosmic joke. There's nothing special about that spot according to any maps or local information. No previous sightings reported in that area, at least none we could find online. That was 3 months ago. Margie and I have done 2 more runs together since then. But we've taken different routes. We've never gone back over that bridge, and we never will if I have anything to say about it. Sometimes we talk about what we saw, trying again to make sense of it. We never do. I keep thinking about that moment, the casual way it walked. The fact that it never looked up, never acknowledged our presence. It's like we were the ones who didn't belong there, not it. And I still can't get past the direction issue. How could we both see the same creature moving in opposite directions? It defies explanation. I've thought about it from every angle, and nothing makes sense. I've been a rational person my whole life. I don't believe in ghosts or aliens or any of that crap, but I know what I saw that day. I saw a Bigfoot. I saw a creature that shouldn't exist but does. Sometimes I wonder if it's still there, walking along that rocky bank, going south or north, or maybe both somehow at the same time, walking with purpose to some destination I can't begin to imagine. I used to laugh at people who claimed they'd seen things like this. I don't laugh anymore. There are things in this world we don't understand, things that don't fit into our neat little boxes of what's possible and what isn't. I know because I saw one. For 5 or 6 seconds on a sunny afternoon in April, from the cab of my truck, crossing a bridge I'd never been to before and will never go to again. And those few seconds changed everything I thought I knew about the world. Story 18. I still can't believe what happened that morning. Every time I try to tell someone, I can see the disbelief in their eyes, like I'm just some crazy goat farmer making up stories. But I know what I saw. I've been replaying it in my head for weeks now. I've lived on this little property outside of Oak Ridge, Oregon, for almost 7 years now. It's nothing fancy, just a small house with about 3 acres, mostly surrounded by thick forest. The previous owners had built a decent-sized pen with a shelter for their chickens, but I decided to try my hand at raising goats instead. Started with 3, eventually got up to 7. They're good animals, entertaining, useful, and they keep the grass down better than any lawnmower. That morning started like any other. It was early spring, around mid-April, and we'd been having this weird weather pattern where thick fog would roll in overnight and hang around until mid-morning. I woke up around 5:30, made coffee, and headed outside to feed the goats, like I always do. The fog was especially thick that day. You know that kind of fog that seems to muffle everything? It was like that. I could barely see 20 feet in front of me as I walked across my yard toward the goat pen. Something felt off immediately. I can't really explain it. Just this weird heaviness in the air, like the feeling before a thunderstorm, except there wasn't any storm coming. When I got closer to the pen, I noticed the gate was slightly open. Not wide open, just cracked a few inches. Now I'm always careful about latching that gate. The goats are clever, and they'll push through any opening they can find. But I distinctly remembered securing it the night before. I hurried over, thinking maybe one of the goats had gotten out. As I approached, I could hear the others making these anxious, bleating sounds, not their normal morning hungry noises, but something more distressed. I counted heads quickly and realized Bella, my oldest goat, wasn't there. She was the first one I'd gotten, a sweet Nubian with floppy ears who'd been with me for 6 years. "Bella!" I called out, thinking maybe she'd just wandered a little way from the pen. Nothing. That's when I noticed something at the edge of the tree line, maybe 50 yards away. The fog was thick, but I could see a dark shape standing just inside the forest. At first, I thought it might be a bear. We get black bears around here sometimes, but as I squinted through the fog, I realized it was standing upright, and it was big. Really big. I froze. Whatever it was, it had to be over 7 feet tall. I could make out broad shoulders and what looked like dark brown fur covering its entire body. It was just standing there, partially hidden by the trees and fog, watching the goat pen, or watching me. I couldn't tell. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I'm not easily scared. Living alone out here, you get used to handling things yourself. But this was different. This was something I'd never seen before. Then it moved. Not away from me, but toward the goat pen. Its walk was strange. Deliberate, heavy steps, but surprisingly fluid. Not clumsy like a bear walking on hind legs. This thing moved like it was perfectly comfortable on 2 feet. Each step it took was massive, covering ground quickly, despite not seeming to hurry. As it got closer and the fog thinned a bit between us, I could see it more clearly. It wasn't a person in a costume. The proportions were all wrong. Arms too long, shoulders too wide, head sitting directly on those shoulders with hardly any neck. The fur or hair covered everything except parts of the face, which looked dark and flat, with a pronounced brow ridge. I was completely frozen, unable to move as it approached. It didn't seem aggressive, just purposeful, like it knew exactly what it was doing and wasn't concerned about me at all. That's when I spotted Bella. She was on the ground near the tree line, about halfway between me and the creature. She must have gotten out somehow during the night. She wasn't moving much, just standing there nervously, probably confused by the fog and unsure where to go. The creature reached Bella before I could even think to move. In one swift motion, it bent down and grabbed her, lifting her completely off the ground with what seemed like no effort at all. Bella started kicking and bleating in panic, but the thing just adjusted its grip, securing her as easily as I might pick up a house cat. That's what finally broke me out of my shocked state. "Hey!" I shouted as loud as I could, my voice cracking. "Put her down!" The creature turned its head toward me. Even through the fog, I could feel it looking directly at me. It didn't make any sound, didn't show any sign of surprise or fear. It just assessed me for a second. Then, as casually as someone might sling a backpack over their shoulder, it tossed Bella over its shoulder. She was still struggling and bleating, but this thing wasn't bothered at all by a 100-pound goat fighting against it. Then it turned and started walking back toward the forest. I don't know what I was thinking. I should have run back to the house for my rifle. I should have called for help. Instead, I started running toward the creature, yelling and waving my arms like an idiot. "Stop! Put her down! Hey!" It didn't even speed up. It just kept walking at the same steady pace toward the trees, completely unfazed by my shouting. I was maybe 30 yards away when it reached the edge of the forest. It paused for just a moment and looked back at me over its shoulder. I'll never forget that look. Not angry or threatening, just aware, like it was noting my presence but didn't consider me important enough to deal with. Then it stepped into the forest and started moving through the trees. I kept running after it, though I slowed down at the tree line. I'm not stupid. These woods get dense fast, and I wasn't about to lose sight of my house in the fog. But I followed as far as I dared, still yelling. The creature moved through the forest with incredible agility. It ducked under branches and stepped over fallen logs without breaking stride or disturbing much around it. Despite its size, it navigated the dense undergrowth better than I could, and I've been walking these woods for years. Bella had stopped struggling by this point, either from exhaustion or fear. I lost sight of them after about 100 yards. The fog was thicker in the forest, and the creature seemed to know exactly where it was going, taking a path that got increasingly difficult to follow. The last glimpse I got was of that massive fur-covered back, disappearing behind a stand of Douglas firs. I stopped, suddenly aware of how quiet it had gotten. No birds, no sounds from other wildlife. Just silence, and in that moment I felt like I was being watched, not just by the creature I'd been chasing, but by others. I can't explain it, just this overwhelming sensation that I wasn't alone, and that I'd gone far enough. I backed up slowly until I reached the edge of the trees again, then hurried back to my property. The other goats were huddled together in the corner of their pen, still making distressed noises. I checked the gate again, trying to figure out how Bella had gotten out. The latch wasn't broken, just unfastened, like someone with fingers had opened it. After securing the remaining goats, I went back to where the creature had entered the forest. The ground was soft from recent rain, and there were footprints, huge footprints, easily twice the size of my own foot, with 5 distinct toes. They were deep too, suggesting whatever made them was very heavy. Alongside them were smaller hoofprints that had to be Bella's. I followed the trail of broken ferns and disturbed soil to where I'd lost sight of them. There were a few tufts of what looked like coarse brown hair caught on a branch. I took one, not really thinking about why. I still have it in a plastic bag somewhere. I never reported it officially. Who would believe me? But I did mention it to old Jim, who runs the general store about 10 miles down the road. Instead of laughing, he just nodded slowly and told me I wasn't the first to see one of them in these parts. Said they mostly keep to themselves, but occasionally take livestock. Said his grandpa used to leave deer meat at the edge of his property as a kind of peace offering. I've reinforced all my fencing since then, added padlocks to the gates, installed motion sensor lights around the perimeter of the property. I even got a large dog from the shelter, a Great Pyrenees mix, who's supposed to be good with goats and as a guard dog, but it doesn't feel like enough. Almost every night now I hear strange noises from the forest. Sometimes it's just breaking branches, but other times it's these weird whooping calls that don't sound like any animal I know. They seem to come from different directions, like there's more than one making them. They never come all the way to the edge of my property, but they're there, watching. The remaining goats sense it too. They get nervous around dusk, huddling together in their shelter instead of grazing until the last bit of daylight like they used to. I've thought about selling the place and moving somewhere more populated, but this is my home. And honestly, where would I go? How do I explain to potential buyers why I'm leaving? Oh, by the way, there's a family of Bigfoot that might steal your livestock. The strangest part is that I'm not exactly scared anymore. Cautious, yes. Alert, definitely, but not terrified like I was that morning. It's more like I've come to realize I'm sharing this land with something that was here long before me and will probably be here long after I'm gone. I just wish I could understand why they took Bella specifically. Was it random? Was it hunger? Or was it something else? Some kind of message or boundary setting? I keep thinking about that look the creature gave me before it disappeared into the trees. There was intelligence there, purpose. 3 nights ago, I woke up around 2 in the morning to the sound of the dog barking frantically. I grabbed my flashlight and rifle and went to the window. The motion lights had triggered, illuminating the yard all the way to the tree line. At first, I didn't see anything. Then, at the very edge of the light's reach, I caught a glimpse of movement. Something tall moving just inside the forest edge. I watched for almost an hour, but nothing came closer to the house. The dog eventually calmed down, though he stayed alert by the door. In the morning, I found something placed carefully on my fence post. A large tuft of Bella's distinctive black and white fur. Not torn out or bloody, just placed there, like a message. I don't know what it means. I don't know what they want, but I know they're out there, watching, waiting. For what, I have no idea. All I know is that the woods around my property aren't just woods anymore. They're territory, theirs, not mine, and I'm just a visitor they're tolerating for now.